The wind possessed a set of teeth that day, chewing on the eaves of the ranch house and spitting grit against the sun-bleached siding. It was a dry, hollow sound, the kind that got inside a man's ear and stayed there, whispering that the world was empty and likely to stay that way. Caleb Holloway pulled the brim of his hat lower, squinting against the stinging dust that rode the gusts. The horizon was a bruised line of purple and gray where the distant mountains met the sky, and above them, clouds were piling up like anvils, heavy and dark with a storm that refused to break. Caleb worked the fence line with a methodical, punishing rhythm. He clamped the wire stretchers onto the rusted barb, hauled it taut until the metal sang a high, tight note, and drove the staple home with a hammer blow that echoed flatly across the sagebrush. He was a man built of hard angles and silence, currently in his late 30s, though the sun and the wind had etched lines around his eyes that belonged to an older man. A scar, white and jagged, ran along the line of his jaw, disappearing into the rough stubble on his cheek, a souvenir from a life he tried not to remember. When he walked to the next post, his gait was uneven, a hitch in his left stride where a lead slug had shattered the bone years ago. The town of Red Rock lay 15 miles to the east, but it might as well have been on the moon. The folks there had long memories and short tempers. They remembered the trial, or what passed for one. They whispered that Caleb Holloway had put a man in the ground over a dispute about water rights, and that his wife had died of a broken heart, or perhaps fright. The truth was a complicated knot that Caleb had stopped trying to untangle for them. He lived alone with the cattle, the wind, and the ghosts that sat on his porch when the sun went down. He wiped sweat from his neck with a dirty bandana and looked west. Something was moving out in the scrub, near the dry wash that marked the edge of his southern pasture. It was too erratic to be a calf, too large to be a coyote. He watched it for a long minute, his hand resting instinctively on the stock of the Winchester in his saddle scabbard. The shape stumbled, fell, rose again, and then collapsed into a heap of pale fabric and stillness. Caleb swore softly. He swung himself up onto his bay gelding, the movement stiff but practiced, and turned the horse toward the wash. When he reached the figure, the wind was whipping the sagebrush into a frenzy. It was a woman. She lay face down in the dirt, her arm thrown out as if reaching for something that wasn't there. She wore a dress that might have once been blue calico, but now it was torn at the hem and bleached to the color of dust. A small bundle, tied with twine, lay near her hand. Caleb dismounted, the impact jarring his bad leg. He knelt beside her, turning her over gently. She was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, with hair the color of dried wheat that had come loose from its pins and plastered itself to her sweating face. Her lips were cracked and parched, her skin burning with fever. But it was her feet that made Caleb draw a sharp breath. They were bare, and they were destroyed. The soles were shredded, raw meat mixed with dirt and dried blood. She had walked miles, perhaps days, over volcanic rock, sharp shale, and thorny underbrush without shoes. The skin was peeled back in strips, and deep stone bruises turned her arches a sickly purple. Caleb sat back on his heels, the wind buffering his back. His first instinct was the old one, the survival instinct. Leave her alone. Ride to town, tell the sheriff, and let the law handle it. But the law in Red Rock was a man named Miller, who drank whiskey for breakfast and played cards with the very men who usually caused this kind of trouble. And the town, if he brought a strange, half-dead woman into Red Rock, the tongues would wag before he even got her to the doctor. They would say he had hurt her. They would look at his scar and his limp and his empty house, and they would condemn him before he spoke a word. But he could not leave her here. The storm building in the west smelled of lightning and hail. The coyotes would be out by dusk. He looked at her face again. There was a desperation in the set of her jaw, even in unconsciousness. "Damn it all," he whispered. He gathered her up. She was lighter than she looked, wasted away by hunger or exhaustion. She moaned low in her throat, a sound of pure animal distress. When he lifted her, he gritted his teeth as his bad leg took her weight, pain shooting up his thigh like a hot wire. He managed to drape her over the saddle horn, climbing up behind her and pulling her slumped body back against his chest to keep her from falling. The ride back to the ranch house was slow. She drifted in and out, muttering things that made no sense, pleas for water, names he did not know. Jagged fragments of fear. Caleb held her steady, his arm like an iron band around her waist, feeling the heat of her fever radiating through her thin dress. The ranch house was a squat, timber structure built to withstand blizzards and bullets. Inside, it was dim and cool, smelling of wood smoke, coffee, and old leather. He carried her into the main room and laid her on the horsehair sofa. He did not put her in the bedroom. That door had been closed for 3 years, and he was not ready to open it, not even for a dying stranger. He lit the kerosene lamp on the table. Though it was still afternoon, the storm clouds had swallowed the sun, turning the sky a bruised purple. He stoked the fire in the cast-iron stove and set a kettle of water to boil. He moved with the economy of a man used to doing everything himself. He found a clean sheet in a trunk and tore it into strips. He found a jar of salve made from animal fat and herbs, and a bottle of whiskey. When he returned to the sofa with a basin of steaming water, her eyes were open. They were wide, dark, and terrified. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the rough fabric of the sofa, her legs drawing up defensively. Her gaze darted to the door, then to the rifle leaning against the wall, then to him. "Easy," Caleb said. His voice was gravel, unused to soft shapes. "You are safe." She stared at him, her chest heaving. She looked at his scar, at the size of him, and she shrank smaller. "Who are you?" she rasped. Her voice was wrecked, dry as the dust outside. "Caleb Holloway, this is my ranch. I found you by the south fence." She blinked, the memory struggling to surface. The fence, the walking, the pain. She looked down at her hands, still clutching the air where her bundle had been. "My things," she whispered. "On the table," Caleb said. He pulled a wooden chair close to the sofa and sat down, placing the basin of water on the floorboards between his feet. He held a cloth in his hand. "I need to clean you up," he said. "Those cuts are deep. Infection will set in if we do not get the dirt out." She flinched violently when he reached toward her. "No," she said. "Miss," Caleb said, his patience thinning, "you have walked halfway across the territory without boots. You are feverish. If gangrene takes hold, you will lose those feet. And that is if you are lucky enough to keep your life." She shook her head, pulling her feet deeper under the hem of her torn dress. It was not just fear of pain. It was a profound, trembling shame. She tried to cover herself, to make herself small and invisible. Caleb sighed, resting his forearms on his knees. He looked her in the eye, his expression stern but not unkind. "I am not asking for a dance," he said dryly. "I am trying to keep you from dying on my floor. Now, show me your feet." The command was soft, but it had the weight of iron behind it. She hesitated, her lip trembling. She looked at the water, swirling with steam, and then back at his face. She saw the scar, but she also saw the hands, large, calloused, working man hands that were waiting, open and still, slowly, agonizingly. She extended one leg, then the other. Caleb did not flinch at the sight, though the damage was worse up close. He dipped the cloth into the hot water, wrung it out, and reached for her left ankle. "This is going to sting," he warned. He began to wash the blood and grit away. She hissed through her teeth, her fingers digging into the cushions of the sofa, but she did not pull away. Caleb worked with surprising gentleness. His fingers were rough, textured like sandpaper, but his touch was light, avoiding the worst of the raw flesh, dabbing rather than scrubbing. As the layers of dirt washed away, the history of her feet began to reveal itself. There were the fresh lacerations from the basalt rocks and the puncture wounds from thorns, but beneath those were older stories. Caleb paused, his thumb brushing over a patch of puckered, shiny skin on the top of her foot, a burn scar, old, and around her ankles, faint white lines circled the bone, marks left by something binding, something that had rubbed raw and healed over and over again. Rope or manacles. He felt a cold anger ignite in his gut, but he kept his face impassive. He rinsed the cloth, the water in the basin turning a murky red. He moved to dry her skin and to check for swelling. His large hand slid upward, past the ankle, gripping the curve of her calf to support the leg. The reaction was instant. Her breath hitched, a sharp intake of air that sounded like a sob. A flush of deep crimson rose from her neck to her cheeks. She went rigid, her eyes squeezing shut. Caleb froze. He looked at her face, seeing the mortification there. It wasn't the reaction of a woman modest about an ankle. It was the reaction of a woman who had been made to feel that her body was a public thing, a shameful thing. In the silence of the room, the only sound was the wind rising outside and the hiss of the kettle. Inside Lena's mind, the silence was filled with noise. She could hear the fiddle music, the stomping of boots on floorboards, the smell of stale beer and tobacco smoke. Lift them higher, darling. Let us see what you are worth. Dance, dance, or you do not eat. The memory of Eli Bard's heavy, ringed hand gripping her ankle, just where Caleb was holding her now, made her stomach turn over. Bard treated her feet like hooves, inspecting them for flaws, forcing her to barefoot performances on rough floors while men laughed and threw coins that she was never allowed to keep. The exposure, the vulnerability of being shoeless in a room full of booted men. But the hand on her calf now was different. It was warm. It was steady. It did not squeeze. It supported. Caleb cleared his throat and slowly, deliberately, withdrew his hand, resting it back on his own knee. The loss of contact left a strange, ghostly warmth on her skin. I need to bandage these, he said, his voice rougher than before. I will put some salve on the cuts. It will help the pain. She nodded, unable to speak, her face still burning. She watched him through lowered lashes. He worked quickly now, wrapping the clean strips of linen around her arches and ankles. He did not look higher than her feet. He gave her dignity by pretending he had not seen her shame. When he was finished, she looked like she was wearing white boots. Rest now, Caleb said, standing up and dumping the bloody water into a slop bucket. I will heat up some stew. He walked into the small kitchen area, his limp more pronounced. Lena watched him go, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She touched the bandage on her left foot. It was tight, secure, safe. That night, the storm finally broke. Thunder cracked like a whip over the ranch house, shaking the dust from the ceiling boards. The rain came down in sheets, hammering against the roof with a deafening roar. Caleb did not sleep in his bed. He sat in the high-backed wooden chair by the door, a blanket thrown over his legs, his Winchester rifle resting across his knees. He dozed in fits and starts, waking at every shift in the wind. Sometime past midnight, a scream tore through the room. Caleb was on his feet instantly, the rifle shouldered, his heart pounding. On the sofa, Lena was thrashing, tangling herself in the quilt. "No!" she screamed. "No, please, I will be good." She sat bolt upright, her eyes wide and unseeing, staring into the dark corner of the room. In the flash of lightning that illuminated the windows, she saw them. She saw Roy Cutter, her stepfather, his face gaunt and cruel, counting the money on the table. She saw Eli Bard, broad and sweating, his smile like a gash in his beard, holding the bill of sale. "You belong to me," Bard said in the dark. "I bought you. You are stock. Get away," she shrieked, scrambling backward until she hit the wall. She looked frantically for a door, a window, any way out. She swung her legs off the sofa, ready to run on her bandaged feet, ready to run until her heart burst. "Lena." The voice was low and calm. It cut through the nightmare. She froze. A match flared, and the lamp glowed to life. Caleb stood there. He was not Roy. He was not Bard. He was the man with the scar and the sad eyes. He held the rifle, but it was pointed at the door, not at her. He was standing between her and the darkness. "You were dreaming," he said. She gasped for air, trembling so hard her teeth chattered. She pulled her knees up, hiding her face in her hands. The terror was a cold sludge in her veins. She expected him to be angry. Men hated it when women screamed. Men hated weakness. Caleb leaned the rifle against the wall and walked to the stove. He poured a cup of water from the pitcher and brought it to her. "Drink," he said. She took the cup with shaking hands. The water was cool. It helped wash the taste of dust and fear from her mouth. "Are they here?" she whispered, looking at the shuttered windows. "No one is here but us," Caleb said. "The storm is loud. It brings up bad memories." She looked at him, realizing he had not moved from his post by the door all night. He was guarding her. The realization was so foreign, so strange, that it made her want to weep. "Go back to sleep," he said. "I am not going anywhere." She lay back down, pulling the quilt to her chin. She watched him return to his chair, settle the rifle back on his knees, and tip his hat down over his eyes. For the first time in years, the darkness did not feel like a cage. The morning broke clear and cold, the air scrubbed clean by the storm. The light that poured through the windows was sharp and unforgiving, revealing the dust motes dancing in the air and the stark emptiness of the bachelor house. Lena woke to the smell of frying bacon and coffee. She sat up, wincing as her feet touched the floor. The pain was a dull throb now, better than the sharp agony of yesterday. Caleb was at the stove. He turned when he heard her move. "There is coffee," he said, "and biscuits." He gestured to a chair at the small table. Draped over the back of it was a dress. It was a simple calico, faded but clean, with a small pattern of yellow flowers. It was clearly old. The fabric was soft with washings, but it was whole. "Your dress is ruined," Caleb said, keeping his back to her as he flipped the bacon. "You can wear that. It belonged to—" "It was here." Lena touched the fabric. It had belonged to his wife. She knew it instantly. There was a reverence in the way he had laid it out. "Thank you," she said softly. She changed behind a privacy screen in the corner, hissing softly as she pulled the dress over her head. It was a little loose in the waist, but it covered her. It made her feel human again. She hobbled to the table and sat down. Caleb placed a plate of food in front of her: biscuit, bacon, beans. He poured coffee into a tin cup. He sat opposite her, nursing his own coffee. He did not eat. He watched her. "We need to talk," he said. Lena stopped chewing. The food turned to ash in her mouth. "Here it comes," she thought. "The price." "I need to know who you are running from," Caleb said. "I told you," she said, her voice tight. "A man." "What man?" Caleb asked. "It does not matter. He is powerful. It matters if he comes riding up my driveway," Caleb said calmly. "I found you half dead on my land. I patched you up. I gave you clothes. I am entitled to the truth." Lena looked down at her bandaged feet. She twisted her fingers in her lap. "His name is Eli Bard," she whispered. Caleb went very still. He knew the name. Everyone in the territory knew the name. Bard owned half the valley south of Red Rock. He owned the biggest saloon in town. He owned the mayor, and he owned the sheriff. "And who are you to him?" Caleb asked. "He says—" She swallowed hard. "He says he bought me. Bought you. My stepfather, Roy Cutter. He owed Bard money, gambling debts. He signed a paper. He traded me to clear the debt. Like a horse." Caleb's jaw tightened, the scar standing out white against his skin. He set his cup down slowly. "When?" he asked. 3 days ago. Bard came to collect. He wanted to see the merchandise. He made me." She stopped. She could not tell him about the dancing. "Not yet. He beat a man to death in the saloon that night," she said rapidly. "A drifter who spilled a drink on him. I saw my chance. I just ran." She looked up at Caleb, her eyes pleading. "If he finds me, he will drag me back, and he will hurt anyone who helped me. You have to let me go. I will keep walking." Caleb looked at her feet. "You will not make it a mile," he said. "Then take me to the sheriff," she challenged, though the thought made her sick. "The sheriff," Caleb said bitterly. "Sheriff Miller and Eli Bard drink from the same bottle. If I take you to Miller, you will be back in Bard's house by supper time." Lena slumped. She knew it was true. "So what will you do?" she asked. "Turn me out?" Caleb looked out the window. He looked at the vast, empty land that had been his only companion for 3 years. He thought about the silence of the house. He thought about the way the town looked at him. A killer. A pariah. "If Bard comes here, he will bring guns." Caleb said, "I know. And if I help you, I am breaking the law. If that paper your stepfather signed holds up in a crooked court, I know," she repeated. "That is why I have to leave." "Sit down," Caleb said sharply. She froze. "You cannot walk," he said. "You have no money. You have no water. Sending you out there is a death sentence. And I am not in the habit of killing women, no matter what the town says about me." He stood up and walked to the window, leaning his hands on the sill. "You can stay," he said, "for now. Until your feet heal." Lena stared at his back. "Why?" she asked. "Because I have an extra room," Caleb said, his voice flat. "And because I do not like Eli Bard." He turned to face her. "But there are rules. You pull your weight when you can stand. You do not ask about my past, and I will not ask any more about yours. We keep to our own business. And if riders come, you hide in the cellar. Do you understand?" Lena looked at him. She saw a hard man, a dangerous man, perhaps, but she also saw the man who had washed her feet with gentle hands and sat guard over her nightmares. "I understand," she said. "My name is Caleb." He said, "I am Lena." Caleb nodded once. "Eat your breakfast." "Lena, it is getting cold." He put his hat on and walked out the door to check the stock, leaving her alone in the quiet house. Lena looked down at her bandaged feet, then at the rifle leaning by the door. Outside, the wind was picking up again, blowing the dust across the endless, empty plains. But for the first time in a long time, she was not running. She took a bite of the biscuit. It tasted like hope. The days that followed did not pass so much as they ground forward, heavy and slow like a millstone turning on grit. Summer had settled over the territory with a vengeance, bleaching the sky to a blinding white and baking the earth until it cracked in jagged fissures. The heat was a physical weight, pressing down on the roof of the ranch house, silencing the birds and sending the cattle seeking the meager shade of the cottonwoods down by the dry creek bed. For Lena, time was measured in the slow knitting of flesh and the dull throb of healing. She spent the first week confined to the house, hobbling from the cot to the table, her feet wrapped in clean linen that Caleb changed with a stoic, clinical efficiency every evening. The shame of those moments, her scarred soles resting in his large, calloused palms, began to fade, replaced by a quiet, rhythmic necessity. The ranch house was a testament to the man who lived in it, sparse, clean, and utterly devoid of softness. There were no curtains, only wooden shutters. The floors were swept bare. The kitchen held exactly enough plates for one man, now 2. As her strength returned, Lena found herself unable to sit idle. Her hands, used to work, felt foreign when they were empty. She began small. She mended a tear in Caleb's work shirt, her needle flashing in the shaft of afternoon sunlight. She soaked dried beans. Skimming the dust from the water, she swept the floor, balancing on her heels to spare her tender arches. It was a strange, silent dance they performed. Caleb would leave before dawn, the smell of coffee and saddle leather trailing in his wake, and return only when the sun was bleeding red into the western horizon. He spoke little, but his eyes missed nothing. He noticed when she had washed the dust from the windows. He noticed the shirt folded neatly on his bed. He noticed how she favored her left foot, which had taken the worst of the rocks. One evening, 2 weeks after he had found her, Caleb came in from the barn carrying a dusty box. He set it on the table with a heavy thud. Lena looked up from the potato she was peeling, the knife pausing in her hand. "I reckon you cannot go barefoot forever," Caleb said, not meeting her eyes. "The ground out here is full of goat heads and scorpions." He opened the box and pulled out a pair of boots. They were leather, well worn but sturdy, the heels low and practical. They were clearly women's boots, the leather shaped by the memory of a smaller foot than his. "They belong to my wife," he said, his voice flat. "Sarah. She has no use for them now." Lena reached out. her fingers brushing the worn leather. It felt like an intrusion, stepping into a dead woman's shoes. But the necessity was undeniable. "Thank you, Caleb," she said softly. "Try them on." She wiped her hands on her apron and slid her foot into the right boot. It was stiff from disuse. When she stood, the leather bit into her heel and pinched the widest part of her foot. Right where the new skin was pink and fragile, she hissed, biting her lip, but forced a smile. "They fit fine," she lied. Caleb watched her wobble. His brow furrowed. He walked over and knelt before her. "Sit down," he commanded gently. She sat. He took her foot in his hand, feeling the leather, checking the fit with the same focus he used when shoeing a horse. "They are too narrow in the toe," he muttered. "And the leather has gone hard. Take it off." He took the boots to his workbench in the corner of the room. Lena watched him, mesmerized by the shift in his demeanor. He was a man of violence, the town whispered. A man who had killed. Yet his hands, currently working in awl and a small hammer, were capable of a terrifying precision. He softened the leather with oil, working it until it was pliable. He punched new holes in the straps to allow for the bandages she still wore. When he brought them back, the smell of neat's foot oil filled the small space between them. He knelt again to help her slide her foot in. This time, his head was bent low, the brim of his hat hiding his eyes. His knuckles grazed her ankle as he pulled the laces tight. The heat of his hand seemed to burn through the thick wool of the socks he had given her. "Better?" he asked, looking up. His face was inches from her knee. Lena could see the gray mixed into the dark stubble on his jaw, the fine lines of fatigue around his eyes. The room felt suddenly too small, the air too thin. "Much better." She breathed, her voice trembling slightly. He lingered there a moment longer than necessary, his hand resting on the toe of the boot. It was a gesture of ownership, or perhaps protection, checking his work. Then he cleared his throat, a rough, grating sound, and stood up abruptly, turning away to stoke the fire. The safety she felt in his presence was a confusing, warm weight in her chest, warring with the fear that was her constant companion. The rhythm of their lives solidified as the summer deepened. Mornings began in the gray light of pre-dawn. Lena would wake to the sound of the pump handles squeaking in the yard as Caleb drew water for the horses. She would rise, wincing as her feet adjusted to the floor, and have coffee boiling by the time he came in. They ate breakfast in silence, cornbread and molasses, sometimes bacon, during the day, while he rode the perimeter of his land, checking for strays and mending the endless breaks in the wire. Lena fought a war against the dust. It was an enemy that never slept, seeping through cracks in the walls, coating every surface in a fine, gritty powder. She scrubbed and swept, finding solace in the exhaustion. If she was tired enough, she did not think. If she was tired enough, she did not remember the feel of rough hands grabbing her, or the sound of Eli Bard's laughter. Evenings were the most dangerous time. The work was done. The sun was down. The world outside shrank to the circle of light cast by the kerosene lantern on the table. Caleb would sit in his high-backed chair, reading aloud from newspapers that were sometimes months old. Brought back from his rare trips to town, he read with a slow, deep cadence, his voice rumbling in his chest. He read about railroad expansions, about Indian treaties broken and signed, about the price of beef in Chicago. Lena sat across from him, darning his woolen socks, the needle weaving in and out. Sometimes, he would pause to explain a political point, or she would ask a question about a place he mentioned. In those moments, they would drift closer to the flame, their shadows stretching long against the wall. They were two lonely people circling the warmth, terrified of getting burned, yet unable to pull away. It was late July when the supply wagon came. It was a creaking, canvas-topped affair driven by a man named Josiah, a peddler who traveled the remote ranches selling flour, sugar, and news. Caleb was out in the north pasture, so Lena met the wagon in the yard, squinting against the glare. Josiah was a talkative man with few teeth and a love for gossip. As he unloaded a sack of flour, he wiped his forehead with a rag, Hotter than the devil's skillet out here. Miss, he wheezed. I come from over toward Clearwater. Dry there too. Lena nodded, keeping her distance. Would you like some water? Bless you, ma'am. As he drank from the dipper, he leaned against his wagon wheel. Strange times we are living in. He said, saw a posse riding near the river crossing yesterday. Big fellows, working for Eli Bard. From what I heard, Lena felt the blood drain from her face. She gripped the porch railing, her knuckles turning white. Bard? She asked, her voice sounding hollow to her own ears. Aye, big cattleman. Seems he lost something, or someone, asking at every homestead and way station about a runaway girl. Said she was a thief. Said she had scarred feet and a pretty face. Josiah chuckled, oblivious to the statue-still woman before him. Imagine that. A girl stealing from Eli Bard. Must have a death wish. Although, looking at you, ma'am, you fit the description a mite, don't you? Except for the feet. I suppose. I cannot see them in those boots. He laughed again. A wheezing sound. Lena forced a smile that felt like a rictus of terror. I have been here with Mr. Holloway for months. She lied. Of course. Just passing on the news. Well, I best be moving. Those clouds over the peaks look like they might mean trouble later. Lena watched him drive away, the dust swallowing the wagon. The terror that had been a low hum in the back of her mind roared to life. He was coming. Bard was hunting her. And he was asking questions. She looked at the ranch house, at the fence Caleb had mended, at the peace he had built here. She could not let Bard find her here. If he did, he would burn this place to the ground. He would kill Caleb without blinking. That night, she could not eat. She sat at the table, her hands trembling in her lap. Caleb watched her, his eyes narrowing, but he asked nothing. She waited until his breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep in the other room. Then, moving like a ghost, she packed her small bundle. She took a canteen of water and a few biscuits. She sat on the edge of the bed and laced up Sarah's boots, her fingers fumbling in the dark. I am sorry. Caleb, she whispered to the empty room. She slipped out the back door into the cool, blue light of pre-dawn. The world was still and silent. She walked toward the corral, intending to cut across the pasture and head toward the mountains. It was madness. She knew she would likely die out there, but dying alone in the scrub was better than watching Caleb bleed into the dirt because of her. She reached the gate and froze. A shadow detached itself from the fence post. The ember of a cigarette glowed bright orange and then arched through the air as it was flicked away. Going somewhere? Caleb's voice was low, but it cracked like a whip in the silence. Lena spun around. He was leaning against the rails, his hat pulled low, his jacket collar turned up. He did not look surprised. Caleb, she gasped. I have to go. And where exactly were you planning to walk? He asked, pushing off the fence and limping toward her. To the moon. You have 2 biscuits and a quart of water. You would be dead by noon. It does not matter, she hissed, backing away. I cannot stay here. Why? Because the peddler brought news. He knew. Of course he knew. He missed nothing. He is coming. Caleb! Lena's voice rose, cracking with panic. Eli Bard. He has men. He is asking for a girl with scarred feet. If they find me here, if they find you here, I will handle it. Caleb interrupted, his voice calm and infuriatingly steady. You cannot handle him, she cried, the fear finally breaking through her restraint. You do not know what he is. He is not just a rancher. He's a monster. He owns the law. He will kill you. Caleb, he will kill you just for standing in his way, and I will not have that on my soul. She turned to run, to scramble over the gate, but Caleb moved with a speed that belied his injury. He caught her arm, his grip firm but not painful, spinning her back around. Let me go, she sobbed, struggling against him. Stop it. Lena, look at me. He gave her a small shake, forcing her to meet his eyes. His face was hard, his jaw set in stone. Tell me, he demanded. Tell me everything, not just the name. I need to know why a man like Bard is hunting a girl across 3 counties. What did he do to you? Lena slumped in his grip, the fight draining out of her. She looked at the buttons on his coat, unable to meet his gaze. The shame rose up, choking her. But the secret was too heavy to carry anymore. My stepfather? Roy. He did not just sell me to work, she whispered, the words falling like stones. He sold me to a backroom game, Bard. He likes to show off his things. She swallowed, the bile rising in her throat. He made me dance, Caleb, on the tables, in the saloon, barefoot. He said shoes were for people, and I was stock. He would invite his friends to watch. He would grab my ankles and lift my legs so they could see the scars, see how tough I was. He called it breaking the filly. She began to shake, deep tremors that rattled her bones. He kept me in a cellar. He told me if I ran, he would hamstring me. That night, he was drunk. A man spilled whiskey on his sleeve. Bard beat him. He beat him until his face was gone. Everyone just watched. I saw the door was open. I did not think. I just ran. She looked up at him then, tears tracking through the dust on her cheeks. He thinks he owns me. Caleb, he has a paper that says so. If he finds me here, he will say you are a thief. He will hang you. Caleb stood motionless. The wind rustled the dry grass around their feet. His face was unreadable, a mask of granite, but his eyes were burning with a cold. Terrifying fire. He did not hug her. He did not offer soft words of comfort. That was not his way. He released her arm slowly. He is not coming today, Caleb said. He will come. Let him come. He looked toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to bleed into the sky. You are not running, he said, and you are not hiding in the scrub like a coyote. From this moment on, you are my housekeeper. What? Lena stared at him, confused. You work here. I pay you a wage, $2 a month and room and board. You are here of your own free will. If Bard comes, or the sheriff, or the devil himself. That is the story. You are an employee, but the paper, a bill of sale for a human being, holds no water in a federal court. Caleb said, it might work in a crooked town court, but if we stand firm, if we make it clear you are not a captive, he has a harder fight. I will not hand you over without a warrant signed by a circuit judge. But Caleb, go inside. Lena, he said, his tone brokering no argument. Put the water back. Make coffee. We have work to do. He turned and walked toward the barn, his limp heavy, his shoulders squared against the world. Lena watched him go. She felt exposed, terrified, and yet, for the first time since she had run from the saloon, she felt like something other than prey. She was a housekeeper. It was a lie, and it was the truth. The arrangement changed the air in the house. It gave Lena a shield. She was no longer a stray. She had a title, but it also added a layer of tension to their evenings. She felt indebted to him in a way that money could not balance. He was risking his life for her, and all she could offer in return was a clean floor and a mended shirt. The town of Red Rock, however, was not so easily appeased. Rumors traveled faster than horses in the West. The supply driver had talked, a neighbor's wife, a sour-faced woman named Mrs. Gable, had ridden by 2 days later and spotted Lena hanging laundry on the line. She had not stopped to say hello. She had stared, her nose wrinkling as if she smelled something rotten, and kicked her horse into a trot. Soon, the whispers reached them. The barefoot stray, the fallen woman. They said Caleb Holloway had finally found a woman desperate enough to live with a wife killer. It came to a head when the flour ran out. They had to go to town. Caleb hitched the team to the buckboard wagon. Lena tried to argue that she should stay, but he refused. If you hide, it looks like guilt, he said. We go together. Head high. The ride to Red Rock was long and dusty. As they rolled onto the main street, Lena felt the eyes of the town on her. Men stopped sweeping the boardwalks to watch. Women pulled their children closer and whispered behind gloved hands. The town felt hostile, a collection of wooden buildings that seemed to lean in, judging her. Caleb stopped the wagon in front of the general store. Stay close, he murmured. They walked onto the boardwalk. Lena kept her eyes down, her boots thudding softly on the wood. She could feel the stares like physical touches. "Well, look at what the cat dragged in." The voice came from the entrance of the Golden Steer Saloon. A man stumbled out, reeking of cheap whiskey. He was a ranch hand, young and mean-eyed, leaning against the doorframe. Holloway and his pet. The drunk sneered. "Heard you got yourself a live one." "Caleb. They say she likes to show off her ankles. That true, darling? Show us a little leg." Lena froze. The words were a bucket of ice water. The shame of the saloon floor came rushing back. She shrank against Caleb's side, trembling. Caleb stopped. He turned slowly to face the man. He did not reach for the pistol on his hip. He simply stood there, large and silent, his shadow falling over the drunk. "You have a tongue that is too big for your mouth." "Boy," Caleb said. His voice was not loud, but it carried down the street. The drunk straightened up, emboldened by the whiskey and his friends watching from the window. "I'm just asking for a look," he laughed. "Heard she is common property." Caleb took one step forward. It was a singular, decisive movement. The air seemed to drop 10 degrees. "She is with me," Caleb said. "And if you speak to her again, or look at her again, I will not use my fists. I will bury you." The threat hung in the hot air, absolute and terrifying because of the calm way it was delivered. The drunk blinked, his bravado evaporating under the cold stare of a man who had already killed. He swallowed hard, muttered something unintelligible, and retreated back into the safety of the saloon. Caleb turned to Lena. His hand hovered near her back, but did not touch her. "Come on," he said. They finished their business in the store quickly. The shopkeeper was polite but cold, taking Caleb's money without meeting his eyes. Lena held her head up, her chin trembling only slightly, buoyed by the memory of Caleb's voice silencing the street. "She is with me." The ride home was quiet. The sky, which had been clear in the morning, began to bruise with purple clouds. The heat broke suddenly, replaced by a cold wind that whipped the horses' manes. "Storm," Caleb said, glancing up. "A bad one." They were 5 miles from the ranch when the heavens opened. It was not a gentle rain. It was a deluge, a wall of water that turned the dust to mud in seconds. Lightning forked across the sky, hitting the ground with cracks that smelled of ozone. The horses panicked, tossing their heads. "We have to take cover," Caleb shouted over the roar of the wind. He steered the wagon toward a cluster of rocks, a limestone outcropping that formed a shallow cave. He halted the team and jumped down, wincing as his bad leg hit the mud. He reached up and pulled Lena down. "Run!" he yelled. They scrambled under the overhang just as the hail began to fall, stones the size of marbles bouncing off the rocks. The space was small, a cramped hollow barely big enough for 2 people. They were pressed together, their backs against the cold stone, chests heaving. Lena was soaked to the skin. Her calico dress clung to her legs, heavy and cold. Her hair was plastered to her skull. She shivered violently, her teeth chattering. "You are freezing," Caleb said. He shrugged out of his canvas duster coat, revealing his damp shirt underneath, and draped the heavy coat over her shoulders. The warmth of his body was trapped in the fabric. "Sit down," he said. "We have to wait it out." They sat on the dry dirt at the back of the hollow. Outside, the world was a white curtain of hail and rain. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of wet earth and damp wool. Lena pulled her knees to her chest. "My feet," she whispered. "The leather is wet. Wet boots will blister you bad." Caleb said, "Let me see." He knelt before her again, just like that first day, but this was different. The storm had created a private world. The thunder was a wall that shut out the judgment of the town. The threat of Bard, the ghosts of the past. He took her foot and began to unlace the boot. The leather was slick and stubborn. He had to work closely. His head bent. He pulled the boot off. Then the damp sock. Her foot was pale and cold, the scars standing out in the dim light. He rubbed her foot briskly between his hands to warm it. The friction sent a jolt of sensation up her leg. "Any pain?" he asked, his voice low. "No," she said, breathless. He moved to the other foot. He unlaced it, pulled it free. As he rubbed the circulation back into her toes, his hands moved up to chafe her ankles, warming the skin. Then, perhaps without thinking, or perhaps because the shivering was shaking her whole body, his hands slipped higher, cupping her calves, his thumbs brushing the skin through the damp fabric of her dress. Lena let out a sound, half laugh, half gasp. The sensation was electric. It was not the invasive grasp of Eli Bard. It was heavy, grounding, and terrifyingly intimate. She blushed, the heat rising to her hairline. Caleb froze. He looked up. His face was open, unguarded for the first time. His eyes were dark, searching hers. He did not pull away immediately. For a heartbeat, the sound of the storm faded. There was only the heat of his hands on her legs and the question hanging between them. Then he blinked, and the mask slammed back into place. He pulled his hands away as if he had been burned. "Sorry," he muttered, turning his head to stare out at the rain. "Just checking for chills." Lena pulled the coat tighter around her, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "It is okay," she whispered. They sat in silence until the rain stopped, neither daring to move. The air between them charged with a lightning that had nothing to do with the sky. That night, the ranch was quiet. The mud outside silenced the world. Lena lay in the bed that had belonged to Sarah Holloway. The sheets were clean and cold. She stared at the ceiling, her body still tingling where Caleb had touched her. A wave of guilt washed over her. She felt dirty. She was a woman who had been handled by men in back rooms, a woman who had been sold. How could she feel this flutter of desire for a man like Caleb? She thought of the way he had stood up to the drunk in town. "She is with me." She thought of his hands on her feet, not to own, but to heal. She rolled over, burying her face in the pillow to stifle a sob. She was terrified that she was broken, that her body only knew how to react to men because it had been trained to be property. But deep down, a smaller, quieter voice whispered something else. It whispered that maybe, just maybe, Caleb Holloway did not see a scarred, barefoot girl. Maybe he saw a woman, and that possibility was more frightening than any storm. August bore down on the territory like a heavy wool blanket soaked in hot water. The sky bleached out to a blinding, relentless white, and the sun hammered the moisture from the earth until the ground cracked open in jagged, thirsty fissures. Dust hung suspended in the still air, a fine, choking powder that coated the back of the throat and settled in the creases of skin. The creek, which had run with a merry, clear chatter in June, was now a sluggish, muddy ribbon threading through the rocks, barely enough to keep the stock alive. The work on the ranch doubled as the water receded. Caleb could no longer manage the spread alone, not with the need to drive the herd daily to the remaining water and mend the fences that the heat warped and snapped. He rode into town one sweltering Tuesday and returned with a boy named Tommy. Tommy was 17, a gangly collection of elbows and knees with a shock of straw-colored hair and a smile that seemed too big for his face. He had arrived from Missouri with nothing but a saddle and a willingness to work for bottom-dollar wages. When Caleb introduced him to Lena, she had been standing on the porch, shaking out a rug. She stiffened instinctively, her hand going to her throat. To her, strange men meant danger. They meant appraisal. They meant the heavy, suffocating scent of tobacco and lust. "This is Lena," Caleb said, his voice leaving no room for questions. "She runs the house." Tommy took off his hat, crushing the brim in his hands. He did not look at her ankles. He did not look at her chest. He looked at her boots, then up to her chin, his face turning the color of a ripe beet. "Pleased to meet you, ma'am," Tommy stammered. "I will try not to track mud on your floors. Mister, Holloway says you keep a clean ship." Lena blinked, the tension in her shoulders unlocking just a fraction. He was afraid of her, or at least afraid of offending her. It was such a novel, disarming realization that she found herself smiling. "There is no mud to track, Tommy," she said. "Only dust. Just stomp your boots." Over the next few weeks, Tommy became a fixture. He treated Lena with a shy, stumbling reverence that made her feel strange, almost like a normal woman. He brought her wildflowers that had managed to survive in the shade of the canyon. He complimented her biscuits, even when they were burnt. For the first time in years. Lena found herself laughing, a rusty, quiet sound, at his clumsy attempts to rope the fence posts. But the heat made everyone short-tempered, including the animals. One afternoon, the air heavy and still. Caleb was in the corral working a new horse, a sour-tempered roan mare with a wild eye. Lena was beating dust out of the curtains on the porch, watching him. She had learned to appreciate the economy of his movement. He did not fight the horse. He negotiated with it, his body tight and controlled. The mare bucked, a violent, twisting motion that sent a cloud of red dust into the air. Usually, Caleb would have ridden it out, glued to the saddle, but the heat had made the mare slick with sweat, and perhaps Caleb's bad leg was slower that day. As the mare twisted, Caleb lost his stirrup. He came down hard. The sound of his body hitting the packed earth was a dull, sickening thud that echoed across the yard. The mare danced away, snorting, while Caleb lay motionless in the dirt. "Caleb!" The scream tore from Lena's throat before she knew she was shouting. She dropped the curtain and vaulted off the porch, forgetting her boots, forgetting the scorching heat of the ground. She ran to the corral, scrambling through the rails. He was trying to sit up, his face gray beneath the tan, one hand pressed against his side. He made a sound, a low, grinding groan through clenched teeth. "Do not move," Lena gasped, dropping to her knees beside him. The dust puffed up around her skirts. She put her hands on his shoulders, terrified by how much pain was etched into his features. "Talk to me. Where are you hurt? Just had the wind knocked out?" Caleb wheezed, squeezing his eyes shut. "And maybe a rib. Damn foolish animal." He tried to take a breath and hissed, his body seizing up. Lena moved closer, her hands fluttering over his chest, checking for broken bones with a frantic, tender urgency. "Let me see," she commanded, her fear making her bold. She leaned in, her face inches from his. In the blinding glare of the sun, the world narrowed down to the two of them in the dust. She could smell the sweat on him, the leather, the horses. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes as they flew open, startled by her proximity. For a moment, nobody moved. Her hands were splayed on his chest, feeling the heavy, rapid thud of his heart. His hand, which had been clutching his ribs, moved to cover hers, his fingers rough and warm. They were close enough to share the same breath, close enough that if she leaned forward an inch, her mouth would brush the salt on his skin. The air between them crackled, hotter than the sun. It was a terrifying, magnetic pull. Lena felt a sudden, sharp ache in her center, a longing to collapse against him, to bury her face in his neck and stay there. Caleb stared at her, his gaze dropping to her lips, then snapping back up to her eyes with a look of panic. "I am fine," he rasped, the words rough. "Lena, I am fine." He pulled away, gritting his teeth as he sat up fully, putting space between them. Lena rocked back on her heels, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She snatched her hands back, clasping them in her lap. I just wanted to be sure," she whispered. "I know," Caleb said, not looking at her. He used the fence rail to haul himself up, favoring his side. "I know." That evening, the tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. Caleb moved stiffly, holding his left side rigid. He tried to carry the water bucket from the stove, but a spasm of pain made him stumble. "Sit down," Lena said. She took the bucket from him. "I can do it," he grumbled. "Sit down." "Caleb, you are stubborn as a mule, but you do not have to prove it to me." He sank into his chair, exhaling a long breath. Lena set the bucket down and brought the liniment jar. She pulled a chair close to his. "Shirt up?" she said. Caleb hesitated. He looked at her, his expression guarded. Then, slowly, he unbuttoned his work shirt and pulled it off his shoulders. Lena had seen men's bodies before. She had seen them in the dim light of the saloon, sweaty and grasping. But this was different. This was a map of violence written on skin. His torso was lean and hard, corded with muscle from years of labor. A bruise was already blooming a dark, angry purple across his ribs where the ground had met him, but that was the least of it. On his left shoulder, there was the puckered, star-shaped scar of a bullet entry. Lower, across his stomach, a thin white line ran diagonally, a knife slash, and on his back, when he shifted, she saw the faint, crisscrossing lines that looked like old lash marks. Lena stared, her fingers hovering over the bullet wound. She applied the liniment to his ribs gently, feeling him flinch not from pain, but from her touch. "Who did this to you?" she asked softly. Caleb looked at the wall. The lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows across his scarred skin. The bullet was from the war. He said, "The knife, that was a drunken Abilene." "And the rest?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The town says you killed a man. That is why they hate you." Caleb laughed, a bitter, dry sound. "Is that what they say, that I'm a murderer?" He turned to look at her, his eyes dark with an old, festering hurt. "I did kill a man," he admitted, 5 years ago, "but not for land. There was a boy, a simple boy, not right in the head. He stole a horse. He did not know better. The owner, a man named Vance, he gathered a posse. They were going to hang the boy from the bridge." Lena stopped moving her hand. She watched his face. "I tried to stop them," Caleb said. "I cut the rope. Vance pulled a gun. I shot him. It was him or me. But Vance was the mayor's brother. The judge ruled it self-defense. But the town decided I was the villain. They said I interfered with justice. They said I was dangerous." He looked down at his hands. "My wife, Sarah." She could not take the silence, the shunning. She died that winter of a fever. But really, she died of loneliness. They blamed me for that, too. Lena felt a stinging behind her eyes. She looked at this man, this collection of scars and silence, and saw her own reflection. They were both marked. They were both judged by people who did not know the weight of their burdens. She reached out and placed her hand flat against the scar on his shoulder. It was a bold move, a claiming. "They are wrong," she said fiercely. "You are not a monster. Caleb, you are the only man I have ever met who uses his strength to protect, not to take." Caleb looked at her hand on his skin, then up at her face. The look in his eyes was raw, stripped of its usual defenses. "And you," he said, his voice rough, "you are not stock, Lena. You are not property. You are the strongest thing on this ranch." They sat there as the oil in the lamp burned low, the silence between them no longer empty, but filled with a taut, electric understanding. It was the intimacy of two soldiers showing each other their wounds in the dark. But peace, as Lena was learning, was a fragile thing in the West. 3 days later, the dogs began to bark, a jagged, warning sound. Lena was in the kitchen, kneading dough. She looked out the window and froze. 2 riders were coming up the long drive. One wore a deputy's star that glinted in the sun. The other was a man she would have known in the pitch dark by the smell of his cruelty alone. Roy Cutter. He looked gaunt, his face a skull wrapped in papery skin, his clothes hanging off his frame. But his eyes were alive with a malicious, glittering light. "Caleb!" Lena screamed, "Dropping the dough! They are here!" Caleb came in from the porch, wiping his hands on a rag. He took one look at her pale face and moved to the gun rack. He took down the Winchester, checking the load with a metallic clack. "Upstairs," he said, "the barn loft. Go, now. But do not argue with me. Lena, hide." She ran. She scrambled out the back, her heart thudding so hard it hurt, and climbed the ladder to the hayloft in the barn. She buried herself in the scratchy straw, peering through a crack in the wood siding. She saw Caleb step off the porch, the rifle held loosely in the crook of his arm. He did not raise it, but its presence was a clear statement. The riders pulled up. The dust swirled around them. "Morning," Caleb said. He did not invite them down. Roy Cutter spat a stream of tobacco juice onto Caleb's clean yard. "You have got something of mine. Holloway, Roy rasped. His voice was like grinding stones. I have cattle, horses, and land, Caleb said evenly. All mine. Do not play games, the deputy said. He was a thick-necked man named Higgins, one of Bard's cronies. We know the girl is here. We have a witness who saw her in town with you. She is my housekeeper, Caleb said, and she is not receiving visitors. Roy laughed. A high, wheezing sound. Housekeeper, is that what you call it? She is a runaway, and she is under contract. He reached into his coat and pulled out a piece of paper. It was crumpled and stained. Signed by me, Roy said, waving it. Transferring guardianship and labor rights to Mr. Eli Bard. She is his property until the debt is paid. You are harboring stolen goods. Caleb looked at the paper. I see a piece of trash, he said, and I see a signature witnessed by a sheriff who is deeper in Bard's pocket than a lint ball. He took a step forward. That girl is of age. She is a free woman, and she is under my protection. That paper says otherwise, Roy shouted, his face twisting. Then bring a judge, Caleb roared back, his voice booming across the yard. A circuit judge, not Miller, not some drinking buddy of Bard's. You bring a federal judge to tell me that a human being can be sold like a heifer, and maybe I will listen. Until then, get off my land. He shifted the rifle. The barrel rose just an inch. The deputy put a hand on his pistol. You are making a mistake. Holloway, Bard does not like being told no, and I do not like trespassers, Caleb said. You have to the count of 5. The tension stretched, thin and screaming. Lena, watching from the loft, pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from sobbing. She saw Roy glare at the house, his eyes scanning the windows. We will be back, Roy spat, and we will bring the sheriff. And fire. You remember that. They wheeled their horses around and galloped off, leaving a cloud of dust that tasted of threat. Caleb watched them go until they were specks on the horizon. Then he turned and walked to the barn. You can come down. He called. Lena practically fell down the ladder. She landed in the straw and scrambled to her feet, grabbing his arm. Let me go, she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Caleb, please. You heard him. They will bring fire. They will burn you out. I cannot let you lose everything for me. Put me on a train. Send me away. No, Caleb said. Yes, she shook him, her desperation lending her strength. It is my life. It is my mess. You have done enough. I will go to another territory. I will change my name, and they will find you, Caleb said, grabbing her shoulders. Men like Bard have long reaches. You will be running until you die in a ditch. Is that what you want? I want you to be safe, she cried. I do not want to be safe, Caleb shouted back. The volume of his voice shocked them both. Silence rang in the barn. He took a breath, his grip on her shoulders softening but not letting go. I do not want to be safe if it means watching them drag you back to that cellar, he said quietly. I have spent 5 years keeping my head down. Lena, trying to be invisible. And it has made me hollow. Protecting you. It makes me feel like a man again. He looked at her, his eyes intense and calculating. But we need a shield. Something stronger than my rifle. What? Lena asked, sniffling. We need to make their claim look like garbage to the town. If you are just my housekeeper, they can say I am exploiting you too. But if you are family. Family. Caleb took a deep breath. If you are my betrothed, he said, my intended wife. Lena stared at him. Her mouth fell open. What? If we are engaged, Caleb said, the words tumbling out faster now. It changes everything. A man cannot claim rights to another man's future wife. It muddies the water. It makes the town pause. They might hate me, but they love a wedding. It gives us a layer of protection. We tell them we are to be married. Lena pulled back, her heart racing. A pretend engagement? She asked. Yes, just until the circuit judge comes through in October, then we can fight the paper legally. And after? She asked, her voice trembling. After, you are free, Caleb said. You can go, or stay. Whatever you choose. Lena looked at his face. It was a tactical offer, a strategy. But beneath the logic, she saw the desperation in him. He was building a wall around her the only way he knew how. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, we will do it." The plan required props. The next day, they rode into town again. The heat was still oppressive, but there was a new determination in the way they sat on the wagon seat. They walked into the general store. The shopkeeper looked up, his eyes narrowing. "We need a ring," Caleb announced loudly enough for the two women browsing the fabric bolts to hear. "A ring?" the shopkeeper asked. "An engagement ring," Caleb said. "For the lady." The silence in the store was absolute. The women stopped whispering. The shopkeeper blinked. I see." He pulled a tray from under the glass counter. It held a meager collection of bands, some silver, some brass, a few thin gold ones. Caleb looked at them, his large hands resting on the glass. He pointed to a simple gold band, thin and unadorned. "That one," he said. He paid for it with coins that clinked loudly on the counter. Then he turned to Lena. "Give me your hand," he said. Lena extended her left hand. It was brown from the sun, the nails short and clean. She was shaking. Caleb took her fingers in his. His hand was trembling too. This was a performance, a lie for the benefit of the town. But as he slid the cold metal over her knuckle, it did not feel like a lie. It felt heavy. It felt binding. He looked her in the eyes, and for a moment, the general store dissolved. There was only the weight of his claim on her, and hers on him. "It fits," he said huskily. "Yes," Lena whispered. "It fits." They walked out into the sunlight, the ring flashing on her finger. The town watched. The whispers started before they even reached the wagon. But this time, the whispers were different. They were confused. Marriage, the killer and the stray? It was a scandal, but it was a respectable scandal. August turned to September, but the heat did not break. Instead, the wind shifted, bringing the smell of smoke. A wildfire had started in the high country, sparked by lightning or a careless camp. At first, it was just a haze on the horizon. Then, the sky turned a bruised, bloody orange. The sun became a red disk behind the veil of smoke. The fire was miles away, but the wind was driving it toward the valley. "We have to move the herd," Caleb said one morning, sniffing the air. "If the wind shifts, the south pasture will be a trap. We need to push them north, across the creek bed to the rocky ground." It was brutal, backbreaking work. Tommy, Caleb, and Leanna rode out at dawn. The heat was suffocating, a physical weight that pressed the breath from their lungs. The cattle were skittish, smelling the smoke, their eyes rolling white. Lena rode the bay gelding, her face wrapped in a bandana against the ash that fell like gray snow. She worked as hard as the men. She cut off strays, shouting through the dry cloth, swinging a rope until her palms were blistered and raw. She watched Caleb. He rode with a grim fury, pushing the animals, saving his livelihood. His shirt was soaked through with sweat, clinging to his back. He did not favor his leg today. Adrenaline had washed away the pain. They worked until the sun went down, a blood-red ball sinking into the haze. The cattle were safe on the rocky plateau. The fire was still a distant glow, a menacing line of orange dancing on the ridge. But it had not crossed the valley. They rode back to the ranch house in silence, too exhausted to speak. They were covered in soot, their eyes rimmed with red, their bodies aching in every joint. Tommy collapsed in the bunkhouse. Caleb and Lena stumbled onto the main porch. Caleb sank onto the bench, leaning his head back against the wall. He closed his eyes. Lena stood by the railing, watching the distant glow of the fire. It was beautiful and terrifying, like everything in this land. She turned to look at him. He looked spent. The lines in his face were deep gouges of shadow. "We did it," she said softly. Caleb opened his eyes. He looked at her soot-streaked face, her matted hair, the way she stood tall despite the exhaustion. "Come here," he said. She moved to him. He reached out and took her hand, the one with the blistered palm, the one with the ring. He ran his thumb over the gold band, now dull with dust. "You rode well today," he said. "Better than most men I know. I had a good teacher," she said. He tugged her gently, and she stepped between his spread knees. It was an unconscious intimacy, born of the adrenaline and the fatigue. He looked up at her, his eyes dark and searching. He reached up with his other hand and cupped her jaw. His thumb brushed the soot from her cheekbone. The touch was electric, sending a jolt straight to her stomach. "Lena," he whispered. He leaned forward. She leaned down. Her breath hitched. She wanted this. She wanted to taste the smoke and the salt on his lips. She wanted him to kiss her, not as a protector, not as a fake fiancé, but as a man who needed her. Their lips were a fraction of an inch apart. She could feel the heat radiating from him. Then, Caleb stiffened. He pulled back. His hand dropped from her face as if he had touched a hot stove. He looked away, his jaw clenching hard. I should check the horses," he said, his voice tight and strained. He stood up abruptly, nearly knocking the bench over, and limped off toward the barn without looking back. Lena stood alone on the porch, the wind whipping her skirt. Her skin tingled where he had touched her. Her lips felt cold and empty. She went inside and lay in the dark bed, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. She touched the ring on her finger. She knew why he had stopped. He was a man of honor. He thought that touching her, when she was dependent on him, when she was vulnerable, was taking advantage. He thought he was protecting her virtue. But as she stared at the ceiling, Lena realized with a terrifying clarity that she did not want to be protected from him. She wanted him to want her. She remembered the way other men had looked at her, like a meal, like a thing to be used. Caleb looked at her like she was precious, like she was glass that might break. "Do not break," she thought fiercely. "See me, see the ruins and the scars and want me anyway." She turned over, burying her face in the pillow, the smell of smoke and sage filling the room. The fire was burning outside, but the one inside her chest was hotter, and she did not know how to put it out. The arrival of Eli Bard in Red Rock was not an event. It was a shift in the atmospheric pressure of the town, a heavy, suffocating blanket that descended with the dust. He did not come alone. He rode a black stallion that cost more than most men earned in a lifetime, and he was flanked by 6 men who wore their guns low and tied down. They were not cowboys. They were regulators, hired hands with cold eyes and callous souls, men who sold their violence to the highest bidder. They rode down the main street at a walk, taking up the entire width of the road. The town, usually buzzing with the mid-morning trade, fell silent. Shopkeepers paused in their sweeping. The blacksmith lowered his hammer. Even the stray dogs seemed to slink into the alleys. Bard stopped in front of the saloon, dismounted with a heavy grace, and walked through the swinging doors without looking left or right. His men tied their horses to the rail, the animals stamping and snorting, a row of sleek, muscular warnings to anyone who thought to cross the man inside. News of the arrival traveled to the Holloway Ranch on the back of a lathered pony ridden by Tommy. The boy slid from the saddle in the yard, his face pale beneath the sunburn. "He is here. Mr. Holloway," Tommy gasped, leaning against the fence rail to catch his breath. "Eli Bard. I saw him. He has got a posse, and they are drinking whiskey at the Golden Steer like they own the place." Caleb was sharpening a scythe on the porch. He stopped, the stone freezing against the metal. He looked at Lena, who was shelling peas into a metal bowl. The color drained from her face so fast it looked as if she had been struck. The bowl clattered to the floor, green peas scattering like buckshot across the wooden boards. "Lena?" Caleb said, his voice sharp with concern. She did not answer. She was not on the porch anymore. In her mind, she was back in the smoky haze of Bard's private parlor. She could feel the rough, splintered wood of the table under her bare soles. She could hear the fiddle screeching a manic tune. She could feel the phantom pressure of Bard's thick fingers digging into her ankles, bruising the skin, lifting her leg high for his friends to inspect the scars on her sole. "Look at the tread on her," he had said, laughing, his breath hot and smelling of rye, tough as boot leather, but soft on top. She stood up, her hands shaking violently. She wiped them on her apron, again and again, as if trying to scrub off a stain that went down to the bone. "He will come," she whispered. He is going to come here. Caleb stood and walked toward her. Lena, listen to me. No! She backed away, her eyes wild. Do not touch me. Do not come near me. Lena, we talked about this. We have a plan. Your plan is for a world that makes sense, she cried, her voice cracking. Bard does not live in that world. He breaks things. Caleb, he ruins them. And I am the thing he broke. She looked down at herself, at the clean dress, at the ring on her finger. I am dirty. She choked out. I am filth. You should not be standing next to me. You should not have me in your house. Caleb's face darkened, a mix of anger and pain. That is not true. It is. I can still feel his hands on me. Do you understand? I am tired of pretending I am normal. I am tired of waiting for the other shoe to drop. I want you to stay away from this. I do not want you involved in my dirt. She turned and fled into the house, the screen door slamming shut behind her. Caleb stood on the porch, his hand half raised. He looked at the closed door, then at Tommy, who was studying his boots in awkward silence. Caleb felt a cold, hard knot form in his stomach. It was the sting of rejection. Yes, but beneath it was a profound understanding of her shame. She was trying to protect him the only way she knew how, by pushing him away before the contamination she believed she carried could touch him. Saddle the bay, Caleb said to Tommy, his voice flat. You going to town, boss? Tommy asked nervously. Not yet. I'm going to ride the fence. If Bard is here, he will not just knock on the front door. He will test the perimeter. Caleb rode out alone, the heat of the afternoon sun beating down on his shoulders. He pushed the horse hard, his eyes scanning the horizon. He rode the southern line first, where the creek bed ran dry. It did not take long to find the signs. A quarter-mile from the road. A section of the new barbed wire he had strung last week was cut. It was not a break from a panicked steer. The wire had been snipped clean with cutters, the ends springing back to leave a 10-foot gap. Further on, near the windmill, he found hoof prints, shod horses, 3 of them. They had ridden in, circled the water tank, and ridden out. They had not taken anything. They had simply left their mark. A silent message. We can come and go as we please. Your fences mean nothing. Caleb dismounted and touched the cut wire. The metal was hot from the sun. This was a siege. Bard was weakening him, showing him that his defenses were paper-thin. He was trying to rattle Caleb, to make him feel the vulnerability of his position before the legal hammer fell. Caleb mounted up. His jaw set so hard his teeth ached. He turned the horse not back toward the ranch, but east, toward Red Rock. He would not wait to be rattled. He would take the fight to the source. The town was tense when Caleb rode in. People he had known for years crossed the street to avoid walking near him. They knew trouble was brewing. And in the west, trouble was contagious. Caleb tied his horse in front of the mercantile, ignoring the row of black horses at the saloon. He walked to the middle of the street and waited. He did not have to wait long. The saloon doors swung open, and Eli Bard stepped out. He was a big man, broad in the shoulders and heavy in the gut, wearing a suit of fine gray wool that looked out of place in the dust. He had a face that might have been handsome once, before greed and whiskey had thickened his features. He saw Caleb and smiled. It was a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Mr. Holloway," Bard called out, his voice booming. "I heard you were in town. Shopping for a wedding, are we?" He stepped off the boardwalk, 3 of his men fanning out behind him. They did not draw their weapons, but their hands hovered near their hips. Caleb stood his ground, his thumbs hooked in his belt. "I am not here to chat." "Bard," Caleb said, "I am here to tell you to stay off my land. Your men cut my wire." "Did they?" Bard feigned surprise, dusting ash from his lapel. "Clumsy of them. Or perhaps your wire was weak, like your claim on that girl." Bard walked closer, stopping 10 feet from Caleb. The smell of expensive cigars drifted on the air. "Let us be reasonable men." "Holloway," Bard said, lowering his voice, "you have something of mine. A girl, Lena. She is not a thing. Caleb said. She is a free woman. She is a contract, Bard corrected, pulling a folded paper from his pocket, signed by her legal guardian. I paid good money for her, $500 to clear her daddy's debts. She is an investment, and she ran off before I could recoup my costs. He looked Caleb up and down, his eyes landing on the worn boots and the faded shirt. I know you. Holloway, you are a man struggling to keep a failing ranch afloat. You are a pariah in this town. You do not need this trouble. Bard reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather wallet. I am a businessman. I will make you an offer. I will pay you $2,000, cash, today. You step aside. Let the sheriff enforce the contract, and you walk away a rich man. You can buy new wire. You can buy a new herd. You can buy a woman who is not damaged goods. The street was silent. $2,000 was a fortune. It was enough to build a new house, to buy the best bulls in the territory, to live in comfort for a decade. Caleb looked at the money in Bard's hand. He looked at Bard's face, smug and assured. You think everything is for sale, Caleb said quietly. Everything is for sale, Bard replied. It is just a matter of price. Caleb took a step forward. That girl, he said, his voice low and dangerous, has more honor in her little finger than you have in your entire body. You think she is cattle. You think she is stock to be broken. He spat on the ground, inches from Bard's polished boot. Keep your money. If you or your men set foot on my land again, I will not look for a sheriff. I will bury you where you stand. That is my contract. Bard's smile vanished. His face went cold and hard. He put the money away slowly. You are a fool. Holloway, a sentimental fool. You think you are saving a damsel. She is a whore who danced on my table for nickels. And when she comes crawling back to me, and she will, you will wish you had taken the money, because now I am going to take her for free, and I am going to take your land for the inconvenience. We will see, Caleb said. He turned his back on Bard, a calculated insult, and walked to his horse. He felt the eyes of the gunman boring into his spine, waiting for the signal. But Bard did not give it. Not here, not in the middle of the day with witnesses. Caleb rode out of town, his heart hammering not from fear, but from a rage so white-hot it made his hands shake on the reins. When he arrived back at the ranch, the sun was sinking low, painting the sky in violent shades of bruised purple and blood red. The wind had picked up, whipping dust into swirling devils in the yard. Lena was standing by the corral, talking to Tommy. She looked frantic. As Caleb rode in, he saw Tommy gesturing, his young voice carrying on the wind. Offered him $2,000. Tommy was saying, his eyes wide, I heard it from the Smith boy who was watching from the alley. 2,000, Lena, that is more money than... Lena froze as Caleb dismounted. She looked at him, her eyes wide with betrayal. She had only heard the numbers. She had only heard that men were trading prices for her skin again. Caleb handed the reins to Tommy. Put him up, he said gruffly. He walked toward the house, intending to wash the town off his skin. Lena stepped in front of him. Did you take it? She asked. Her voice was trembling, brittle as dried grass. Caleb stopped. He looked at her, exhausted and angry that she even had to ask. What? The money, she said, tears welling in her eyes. Did you take it? Is that why you are back? To tell me I am sold again? Do not be stupid, Caleb snapped, trying to step around her. Stupid? She shoved his chest, a desperate, forceful blow that made him stumble back. I am not stupid. I know how the world works. $2,000. Caleb, why would you not take it? I am just trouble to you. I am a burden. I am the reason your fences are cut and your life is in danger. She was screaming now, the words tearing out of her throat. You should have taken it. You could have fixed the roof. You could have bought a new herd. Why are you pretending to be noble? Just admit that I am currency. That is all I have ever been, a thing to be traded between men to settle debts. Stop it, Caleb shouted. He grabbed her wrists, pinning them to her sides to stop her from shoving him again. They stood chest to chest in the rising wind, breathing hard. I did not take the money because I do not want the money. Caleb roared, his reserve finally shattering. I do not want a new herd. I do not want a new roof. Then what do you want? She screamed back, sobbing. What do you want from me? I want you. The words hung in the air, louder than the wind. Caleb stared at her, his chest heaving. I want you, he repeated, his voice dropping to a rough growl. And not as a housekeeper, not as a charity case, and not as damn property. He shook her gently, forcing her to look at him. Before you came here, this house was a tomb. I was a ghost haunting my own land. I woke up every day wishing I hadn't. You walked into this yard half dead, and you made the air breathable again. You made the house feel alive. Lena stared at him, the tears tracking muddy paths down her cheeks. She stopped fighting against his grip. You think I am keeping you because of a debt? Caleb asked, his voice cracking. I am keeping you because when you are not in the room, the color goes out of the world. Lena let out a choked sob. She sagged in his grip. But I am ruined, she whispered. I am afraid. Caleb, I want you. I want you so much it hurts. But I am terrified. Of what? That if I give in, if I let myself want you, you will turn into him. You will turn into a man who thinks he owns me. And I cannot survive that again. Caleb looked at her, his heart breaking for the 1,000th time since he had met her. Before he could answer, the light changed. The purple sky turned a sickly, greenish black. The wind, which had been gusting, suddenly stopped, leaving a vacuum of silence. Then, a roar began in the north, a sound like a freight train bearing down on them. Caleb looked up. A wall of brown dust, 1,000 feet high, was racing across the plains, devouring the world. Dust storm, he shouted. He grabbed Lena's hand. Run! The barn! They sprinted across the yard. The wind hit them before they reached the door. A physical blow that nearly knocked them off their feet. The air turned instantly into a grit-filled scouring pad. Sand filled their eyes, their noses, their mouths. They threw themselves through the barn door, and Caleb slammed it shut, dropping the heavy wooden bar into place just as the storm swallowed the ranch. Inside, it was pitch black and stiflingly hot. The sound of the wind outside was deafening, a constant, screaming roar that made the heavy timbers of the barn groan. The roof rattled as if giant hands were trying to tear it off. They collapsed into the straw in the corner of the empty horse stall. Lena was shaking, her whole body vibrating with adrenaline and the sudden, terrifying violence of the weather. She curled into a ball, covering her head with her arms. Caleb crawled to her. He pulled her into his lap, wrapping his heavy canvas coat around both of them. It is all right, he yelled over the roar, though he could barely hear himself. The barn is solid. We are safe. She buried her face in his chest, clutching his shirt. He held her tight, his chin resting on the top of her head. He could feel her trembling subside slowly, matched by the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat. They sat like that for an hour, maybe 2. The storm raged on, a fury that isolated them from the rest of the universe. In the darkness, with the smell of sweet hay and old leather, the rest of the world ceased to exist. There was no bard, no sheriff, no town. There was only the heat of their bodies and the circle of his arms. Slowly, the roar outside began to dull, settling into a steady, rhythmic drumming of sand against wood. Lena lifted her head. In the gloom, her eyes caught the faint light filtering through the cracks in the siding. She looked at Caleb. He was watching her. He did not look like a savior now. He looked like a man, dusty, tired, and open. You said you wanted me, she whispered. The barn was quiet enough now that he could hear her. Caleb went still. I do. Lena reached up. Her hand, shaking slightly, touched the scar on his jaw. She traced the jagged white line with her thumb. I am not afraid of the storm, she said softly, and I am done being afraid of you. Caleb caught her hand. He kissed her palm, his lips pressing against the callus earned from his ropes. Lena, he murmured, I will never ask for more than you give. I will never touch you where you do not want to be touched. I know, she said. She sat up, the coat falling away. She reached for the buttons of his shirt. "Show me," she whispered, echoing the words he had said to her months ago. He let her undress him, let her hands explore the map of scars on his chest and back. She kissed the bullet wound on his shoulder. She pressed her cheek against the knife slash on his ribs. She claimed his pain as he had claimed hers. Then he laid her back in the straw. He unlaced her boots, Sarah's boots, and set them aside. He peeled off her stockings. "Show me your feet," he whispered. She lifted her legs. He did not inspect them. He worshipped them. He kissed the arch of her foot, the rough, scarred skin of her sole, the rope burn on her ankle. He traced the lines of her suffering with his tongue and his lips, transforming the marks of shame into something sacred. When he moved up her body, when their skin finally met, there was no taking. There was only giving. It was a slow, desperate collision of two lonely souls finding an anchor in the storm. Lena cried out, not in pain, but in the sheer, overwhelming relief of being held by a man who kneeled before her, not to own her, but to honor her. The storm died sometime before dawn. The wind dropped, leaving a silence so profound it rang in the ears. Lena woke to the sound of a meadowlark. Sunlight was slicing through the gaps in the barn wall, illuminating dust motes that danced like gold dust in the air. She was lying in the straw, covered by Caleb's coat and a horse blanket. Caleb was asleep beside her, one arm thrown loosely over her waist. His face relaxed in a way she had never seen. He looked younger. The tension that permanently furrowed his brow was gone. She lay there for a long moment, watching him breathe. She felt sore, but it was a good soreness. She felt solid. The shame that had dogged her for years was gone, burned away by the friction of their bodies and the honesty of his touch. She felt safe. Maybe, she thought, watching the dust motes swirl, maybe the West doesn't have to be just survival. Maybe it can be this, too. She shifted, and Caleb's eyes opened. He blinked, then focused on her. A slow, warm smile spread across his face. He pulled her closer, kissing her forehead. "Morning," he rasped. "Morning." She smiled. "We should go to the house," he said reluctantly. "Get some coffee." They dressed in the quiet light, touching each other frequently. A hand on a shoulder, a brush of fingers against a waist. They walked out of the barn into a world that had been scrubbed clean. The air was crisp. The sky was a brilliant, impossible blue. They walked toward the house, hand in hand. Then, the ground began to tremble. It was a low rumble at first, then a thunder of hooves. Caleb stopped. His grip on her hand tightened until it hurt. He looked toward the rise. "Riders," he said. "They came over the hill at a gallop. 6, 8, 10 men." Dust plumed behind them. At the front rode the sheriff, a star pinned to his vest. Beside him was Roy Cutter, and flanking them was Eli Bard, looking fresh and untouched by the storm. "Go inside," Caleb said, pushing Lena toward the porch. "No," she said, grabbing his arm. "I am staying with you. There is no time. Go!" He didn't wait. He stepped out into the yard, bare-chested under his unbuttoned coat, his hair wild. He stood between Lena and the riders. The posse pulled up in a swirl of grit. The horses were blown and sweating. Sheriff Miller stepped down. He was a paunchy man with watery eyes and a weak chin, holding a warrant in his hand. "Caleb Holloway," Miller said, his voice trying for authority and landing on nervous. "You are under arrest." "For what?" Caleb demanded. "Assault on a deputy," the sheriff read. "Land theft, and harboring a fugitive." "It is a lie," Lena shouted, stepping off the porch. Bard chuckled. He sat high on his black horse, looking down at them. He looked at Caleb's disheveled state, at Lena's wild hair, and his lip curled in a smirk. "Looks like we interrupted the honeymoon." "Sheriff," Bard said. "Take him," the sheriff ordered. 2 deputies jumped down. Caleb raised his fists, but a third man swung a rifle butt from behind his horse. It connected with the back of Caleb's head with a sickening crack. Caleb crumbled to his knees. "No!" Lena screamed. She tried to run to him, but Roy Cutter spurred his horse forward, blocking her path. "Get back, girl!" Roy hissed. The deputies hauled Caleb up. He was dazed, blood trickling from his hairline. They slammed him against a horse and shackled his hands behind his back. "You cannot do this!" Lena cried. "He has rights!" Bard rode his horse closer to her. He leaned down, the smell of his cologne overpowering the clean morning air. "He has nothing," Bard said softly. "He has no money. He has no friends. And now, he has no freedom." He looked at her bare feet, peeking out from under her dress, and smiled. "Do not worry about your things. Darling," Baird said, "we will come back for you. Once the trash is taken out, I will be back to collect my lost property." He signaled the men. "Move out!" They dragged Caleb to a spare horse and threw him into the saddle, tying his feet beneath the belly. Caleb looked back at Lena, his eyes swimming but fierce. "Lock the door!" he shouted, his voice slurred. "Lena, lock the door!" Then they whipped the horses, and the posse thundered out of the yard, taking the only safety Lena had ever known with them, leaving her standing in the dust. The silence of the morning shattered into a million jagged pieces. The road to Red Rock was a scar of beaten earth carved into the skin of the prairie, and it was down this road that they dragged Caleb Holloway. He rode with his hands shackled to the horn of a deputy's saddle. His own horse led behind, while the dust kicked up by the posse coated his face in a mask of gray grit. The iron cuffs bit into his wrists with every jolt of the gait, grinding against bone. But Caleb did not make a sound. He sat upright, his spine a rigid line of defiance, staring straight ahead at the swishing tail of the horse in front of him. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him slump. Back at the ranch, the silence that followed the thunder of hooves was heavy and suffocating. Lena stood on the porch, her hand gripping the rough wood of the railing until splinters dug into her palm. The sun was climbing toward its zenith, turning the world into a washed-out photograph of blinding whites and sharp, black shadows. It felt like a nightmare she had lived a dozen times before. The good men were in chains, the bad men were riding high, and she was the pivot point upon which all this suffering turned, a cursed thing that brought ruin to anyone foolish enough to show her kindness. She was still standing there, frozen in the amber of her own despair, when the sound of a wagon approaching broke the spell. It was Mrs. Harper, the widow from the neighboring section, driving a buckboard with a shotgun across her knees. Tommy was with her, riding double on her workhorse, his face streaked with tears and dust. They took him. Tommy choked out as he slid to the ground. They took Mr. Holloway. I tried to follow, but they threatened to shoot the mare. "I know," Lena said, her voice hollow. "Mrs." Harper climbed down. She was a woman built of rawhide and pragmatism, wearing a bonnet that had seen better decades. "We do not have time for weeping," she said sharply, though her eyes were kind. "Bard and that skeleton of a stepfather of yours are not done. They left the sheriff to haul Caleb in, but they circled back. They are sitting on the ridge right now, watching the house." Lena looked up, far off, silhouetted against the burning sky. She saw the riders. They were motionless, like vultures waiting for the carrion to ripen. "They are waiting for nightfall," Lena whispered. "Or for me to run, Mrs." Harper nodded. "They want to flush you out, or they want to come in here and take you without Caleb in the way. We need to fortify." They spent the next hour turning the ranch house into a fortress. It was a grim, sweaty business. Tommy nailed heavy planks over the windows. Mrs. Harper and Lena dragged the heavy oak table against the front door. They filled buckets with water in case of fire. The air inside the house grew stifling and dim, smelling of fear and trapped heat. As Lena pushed a heavy wardrobe against the back door, her eyes fell on Caleb's unmade bed. His shirt, the one he had worn yesterday, was draped over the chair. It still smelled of him, of sweat, tobacco, and the rainstorm they had weathered together. The grief hit her then, a physical blow that doubled her over. She sank to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. "It is my fault," she sobbed. "I should have run weeks ago. I should have let the desert take me." Tommy stopped hammering. He walked over and crouched beside her, his young face struggling with a man's burden. Mr. Holloway knew the risks. Lena, he chose this. He told me once that a man who has nothing to fight for is already dead. You gave him a reason to be alive? Lena looked at the boy. He was terrified. His hands were shaking, but his jaw was set. We cannot stay here, Lena said slowly. The realization crystallized in her mind, cold and sharp. If we stay, they will burn us out. They will wait until we are weak, and then they will break down the door. And Caleb is sitting in a cell, waiting for a judge who drinks with Eli Bard. What choice do we have? Mrs. Harper asked, checking the load in her shotgun. I have to go to town, Lena said. You are mad. The widow snapped. That is exactly what they want. To catch you in the open. No, they want to catch me running. They want to catch a fugitive. Lena stood up. Her legs were trembling, and the scars on her feet throbbed with a phantom ache. But her voice was steady. I'm going to ride into Red Rock in broad daylight. I'm going to walk into that courtroom, and I am going to tell them what Eli Bard really is. He has a contract, Tommy warned. A bill of sale. A piece of paper. Lena spat. Written by men who think I am livestock. I have spent my whole life letting men speak for me, letting them write my value on scraps of paper. Today, I speak for myself. She walked to the bedroom and found the boots Caleb had fixed for her. Sarah's boots. She pulled them on, lacing them tight over her scars. They felt like armor. I am coming with you, Tommy said. No, Tommy, it is too dangerous. Mr. Holloway would skin me alive if I let you ride alone, Tommy said. And besides, I know where the sheriff keeps the spare keys. My uncle used to sweep the jailhouse. He looked at her, a mischievous glint in his eye that masked his fear. If we are going to fight the law, we might need to break it a little. The ride to Red Rock was a journey through a furnace. The heat waves shimmered off the hard pan, turning the horizon into a watery mirage. The landscape felt hostile, a collection of jagged rocks and sparse, thorny brush that seemed to snatch at the horse's legs. Lena rode the bay gelding, sitting tall in the saddle. Every mile was a testament. She remembered walking this ground barefoot, leaving blood on the stones. She remembered the sheer animal panic of being hunted, but she was not running today. She was charging. They reached the outskirts of town just as the church bell tolled noon. The sound was flat and mournful in the heavy air. The streets were eerily quiet. Word of the trial, if it could be called that, had drawn everyone to the courthouse. They tied the horses in the alley behind the mercantile. Go to the jailhouse, Lena whispered to Tommy. If Caleb is not there, come to the court. Do not get caught. Tommy nodded, his face pale, and slipped away into the shadows. Lena smoothed her dress. She dusted the grit from her sleeves. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of dry sage and horse manure, and walked onto the main street. The courthouse was a brick building that radiated heat like an oven. The double doors were open, spilling a murmuring crowd onto the steps. Lena pushed her way through. Men turned to look at her, their conversations dying in their throats. She felt their eyes, curious, judgmental, hungry, but she did not look down. She looked straight ahead. The courtroom was packed. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale tobacco smoke, and impending violence. At the front, behind a raised desk, sat Judge Holloway, no relation to Caleb. A circuit judge who had arrived a week early, much to the sheriff's dismay. He was a stern man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a face carved from granite. On the left sat Eli Bard, looking cool and composed in his gray suit, fanning himself with a folded newspaper. Roy Cutter sat beside him, looking like a vulture in a borrowed coat. On the right stood Caleb. He was in chains. Heavy iron cuffs bound his wrists and ankles. His face was bruised, one eye swollen shut, and dried blood matted his hair. He stood with his weight on his good leg, swaying slightly, but his head was up. When he saw Lena enter, his good eye widened in horror. "No," he mouthed. "Go back!" Lena did not stop. She walked down the center aisle, the crowd parting for her like water. Her boots struck the floorboards with a heavy, deliberate rhythm. Thud, thud, thud. She stopped at the railing that separated the spectators from the court. Order. The judge banged his gavel. Who is this woman? I am the property in question. Your Honor, Lena said. Her voice shook, but it carried to the back of the room. A ripple of whispers went through the crowd. Bard stopped fanning himself. He turned slowly, fixing her with a stare that was pure, reptilian menace. Ah, the runaway, Bard said smoothly. Standing up, you save us the trouble of a manhunt. My dear Sheriff, take her into custody. Sit down. Mr. Bard, the judge snapped. He looked at Lena over his spectacles. You are Lena Cutter. I am Lena, she said. I do not claim the name Cutter. That man, she pointed a shaking finger at Roy, forfeited the right to give me a name when he sold me for a gambling debt. Objection, Roy shouted. Jumping up, she is my ward. She is a liar and a thief. The judge banged the gavel again. Hard enough to make the water pitcher jump. Silence. I will have order in this court or I will clear the room. He looked back at Lena. Mr. Bard has presented a contract. Miss, it states that your guardianship and labor were transferred to him in exchange for the settlement of debts. It appears legal on its face. It is not legal, Caleb rasped. His voice was rough, his throat dry. It is slavery. You are silent. Prisoner, the sheriff barked, stepping forward to backhand Caleb. Do not touch him, Lena screamed. She vaulted the railing. It was an unladylike, desperate move that shocked the room into silence. She landed between Caleb and the sheriff, her chest heaving. You want to talk about contracts? Lena demanded, turning to the judge. You want to talk about the law? The law says a contract requires value for value. It says a human being cannot be sold unless they are a criminal or a slave. I am neither. She pointed at Bard. That man did not buy my labor. He bought my pain. He bought the right to humiliate me. That is slander, Bard said coldly. I offered her a home, a job. A job. Lena laughed. A frantic, jagged sound. Is that what you call it? She looked at the jury box. 12 men from the town, some of whom she recognized from the saloon. Ask them. She challenged Bard. Ask the men in this room what my job was. She turned back to the judge. He says I am property. He says I'm stock. He likes to check my condition. He likes to see if I am broken in the right places. She reached down and grabbed the hem of her skirt. The room gasped. A woman lifting her skirts in public was a scandal. But Lena did not stop at her ankles. She sat on the edge of the defendant's table and began to unlace her boots. What is the meaning of this? The judge demanded, though he did not look away. He calls me a filly, Lena said, her fingers flying over the laces. He says I have to be shod. He likes to see the proof of his ownership. She pulled off the left boot, then the stocking. She threw them onto the floor, then the right. She stood up, barefoot on the dusty floorboards of the court. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating thing. Lena's feet were a map of torture. The new pink skin where Caleb had healed her was surrounded by the brutal, jagged geography of her past. There were the white, shiny rings of rope burns around her ankles. There were the circular, puckered marks of cigar burns on her insteps. There were the thick, twisting keloids of old lash marks that wrapped around her calves. And on the sole of her right foot, visible as she turned it, was a brand, a crude, ugly bee burned into the arch. Show me your feet, Caleb had said with tenderness. Now she showed the world with rage. This is his contract, she shouted, her voice breaking. She pointed to the brand. He held me down while his men did this. He told me that if I ran, he would cut the tendons so I would never walk again. He made me dance on these feet while they were bleeding. He made me dance for hours on splintered wood while he drank whiskey and laughed. She turned to the jury, tears streaming down her face. Is this the law? Is this what you men of Red Rock stand for? A piece of paper that says a man can do this to a woman and call it business? She looked at Caleb. He was weeping. Silent tears cut tracks through the dust on his face. He looked at her not with pity, but with a fierce, burning pride. The judge took off his glasses. He wiped them with a handkerchief. His hands were shaking. He looked at the contract on his desk, then at Lena's feet, then at Eli Bard. Mr. Bard, the judge said, his voice ice cold. "Explain the brand." Bard's composure cracked. His face flushed a dark, angry red. "She is a wild animal," he snarled. "She needed breaking. It is standard practice for livestock. She is a woman," the judge roared, slamming his hand on the desk. The crowd erupted. The shame that Lena had felt for months was suddenly transferred to them. They looked at the scars and saw their own complicity. Men began to shout. "Hang him!" someone yelled. Bard looked around, his eyes darting like a trapped rat. He saw the mood shifting. He saw his power dissolving in the face of the truth Lena had laid bare. He made a sharp gesture with his hand toward the back of the room. Outside, a gunshot cracked, then another, then the shattering of glass. Bard's hired men, stationed in the street, had opened fire on the mercantile. It was a diversion, crude and violent. Panic swept the courtroom. People screamed and dived for the floor. The sheriff drew his gun, looking confused. In the chaos, Bard lunged. He did not go for the door. He went for Lena. He grabbed her by the wrist, his grip like a steel trap. "You are coming with me, you little witch," he hissed. He yanked her hard, dragging her toward the judge's chambers and the back exit. Lena stumbled, her bare feet slipping on the polished floor. She cried out as he twisted her arm. "Caleb!" Caleb was already moving, just seconds before the shots. Tommy had slid through the press of the crowd near the defendant's bench. He had bumped into Caleb, a clumsy, seemingly accidental collision. But in that second, he had pressed a small, thin metal file into Caleb's palm. Caleb had been working on the lock of his wrist irons under the cover of the table ledge. When the gunshots rang out, the mechanism clicked. The irons fell away with a clang that was lost in the screaming. Caleb vaulted over the table. He did not have a weapon. He did not care. He was a missile of pure rage. The sheriff turned, raising his pistol at Caleb. "Stop!" the sheriff yelled. Caleb didn't stop. He lowered his shoulder and slammed into the sheriff, driving the breath out of the man. The gun skittered across the floor. Caleb scrambled for it. His hand closed around the cold metal of the Colt peacemaker. He rolled to his knees, cocking the hammer. Bard had Lena at the door to the chambers. He was dragging her, her heels skidding, kicking and screaming. "Let her go!" Caleb roared. Bard spun around, using Lena as a shield. He had a derringer in his other hand, a small, deadly distinct weapon. He pressed it to Lena's temple. "Back off! Holloway!" Bard screamed. "I will kill her! I swear it! I will blow her brains out right here!" The courtroom froze. The screaming stopped. The only sound was the heavy breathing of the men and the distant gunfire outside. Caleb stood 20 feet away, the heavy pistol leveled. His aim was steady, but his heart was hammering against his ribs. He could see the terror in Lena's eyes. He could see the sweat on Bard's forehead. "Drop the gun," Caleb said. "It is over. Bard, it is over when I say it is over," Bard shouted. "Open that back door." Roy Cutter, who had been cowering behind the judge's bench, scrambled to open the door to the alley. "Move," Bard commanded, dragging Lena backward. He pulled her through the doorway into the blinding sunlight of the alley. Caleb lunged forward. No, he sprinted through the door after them. The alley was narrow, cluttered with rain barrels and crates. Dust swirled in the wind. Bard was backing away, dragging Lena. She fought him, clawing at his face, kicking at his shins with her bare feet. "Let go!" she screamed. She stomped down hard on Bard's instep. He howled in pain, and his grip on her wrist loosened just a fraction. Lena twisted away. She stumbled, falling to her knees on the rough gravel, her palms scraping raw. "Duck! Lena!" Caleb screamed. Bard raised the derringer, aiming not at Lena, but at Caleb. Caleb fired. The boom of the Colt was deafening in the confined space. At the same instant, Bard fired. Caleb felt a line of fire sear across his ribs, a graze. He did not flinch. He racked the hammer and fired again. Bard jerked backward. A red blossom appeared on his chest, staining the gray silk of his vest. He looked down at it, surprised. He opened his mouth to speak, but only blood came out. He collapsed backward into the dust, his eyes staring up at the white sky, seeing nothing. Lena scrambled backward, gasping. Behind her, a shadow moved. Roy Cutter had been hiding behind a stack of crates. He stepped out now, his face twisted in a rictus of hate. He held a rusty revolver. He did not look at Caleb. He looked at Lena. "You ruined everything," he hissed. "Ungrateful brat." He raised the gun. Lena froze. She looked down the barrel. She saw the darkness inside it. "Roy!" The shout came from the roof of the shed above them. Tommy jumped. The boy had climbed the drain pipe to get a vantage point. He launched himself into the air, a flailing tangle of limbs. He landed on Roy just as the trigger broke. The gun went off. The sound was different this time. Muffled. Close. Tommy and Roy hit the ground in a heap of dust and limbs. They rolled once, then they stopped. Roy groaned, holding his head where it had struck a rock. Tommy did not move. "Tommy!" Lena screamed. She crawled to him, ignoring the sharp stones cutting her knees. She turned him over. The boy's eyes were open, looking up at the sky. There was a small, dark hole in the center of his chest. His shirt was soaking wet with red. "Tommy?" Lena whispered. She pressed her hands to the wound, trying to hold the blood in, trying to push the life back into him. "Oh, God, no, Tommy, please!" Caleb limped over. He kicked the gun away from Roy's hand. He looked down at the boy. He dropped to his knees beside Lena. "He's gone." "Lena," Caleb said, his voice breaking. "No." Lena sobbed, rocking back and forth. "He is just a boy. He is just a baby." She clutched Tommy's shirt, her tears falling onto his still face. He had brought her flowers. He had helped her with the laundry. He had jumped off a roof to save her life. The alley began to fill with people. The judge, the townspeople. They stopped at the entrance, silenced by the tableau. The dead tyrant in the dust, the grieving woman with scarred feet, the rancher with chain marks on his wrists, and the dead boy who had paid the price for their cowardice. Caleb stood up slowly. He winced as his ribs pulled, but he ignored the pain. He walked over to Roy Cutter, who was trying to crawl away. Caleb put a boot on Roy's chest and pressed him into the dirt. "Stay," Caleb said softly. He looked up at the crowd. He looked at the faces of the men who had whispered about him, the women who had shunned Lena. "Are you happy?" Caleb asked. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a knife. "Is this enough blood for you?" He pointed at Tommy's body. "He was 17. He died because you let a man like Bard run this town, because you looked the other way when he hurt people, because you cared more about a piece of paper than a human life." The judge stepped forward. He looked sick. He looked at Bard's body, then at the contract still clutched in Bard's dead hand. He walked over and pried the paper loose. He tore it in half, then in quarters. He let the pieces flutter down into the blood and dust. "Sheriff," the judge said to the deputy who had followed him out, "arrest Roy Cutter for murder and take Sheriff Miller into custody for corruption and conspiracy." The deputy hesitated, looking at his old boss. "Do it!" the judge roared, "or I will have you hanged alongside them." The deputy moved. He hauled Roy up, ignoring his protests. He took Miller's gun. Lena did not watch. She was still holding Tommy's hand. It was growing cold. She smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am so sorry." Caleb knelt beside her again. He put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, her body shaking with exhaustion and grief. He helped her stand. She was barefoot, her feet bleeding, her dress torn and stained with the blood of a boy who had been her friend. Caleb took off his coat and wrapped it around her. "Come on." "Lena," he said gently, "we are going home." They walked out of the alley, leaving the town to clean up its own mess. They walked past the silent crowd, past the saloon, past the jail. They walked toward the wagon. The price had been paid. The contract was broken. But as Lena looked at the empty sky, she knew that the stain of this day would never wash out. They had won their freedom, but they had lost their innocence, and the West felt colder than it ever had before. The silence that fell over Red Rock in the weeks following the shooting was not the peace of a sleeping child, but the stunned quiet of a man who has just walked away from a carriage wreck. It was a heavy, contemplative silence. The violence in the alley had broken the fever that had gripped the town for years. Eli Bard was dead, buried in a plot with an expensive marble headstone that no one visited. Roy Cutter was rotting in a cell in the territorial capital, awaiting a hanging judge. The hired guns who had ridden with Bard, seeing their paymaster cold in the dirt and the town turning hostile, had scattered like cockroaches when a lantern is lit. 2 of them were caught by a vigilante group near the river crossing and did not make it to trial. The rest disappeared into the hills, becoming ghosts in campfire stories. But at the Holloway Ranch, the silence was different. It was the silence of grief, and of exhaustion so deep it felt like it had settled in the marrow of their bones. The ranch had suffered during Caleb's imprisonment. Fences were down, the windmill was jamming, and the garden was a scorched ruin. But before any of that could be mended, there was a debt to be paid. They buried Tommy on a Tuesday morning, on a small rise to the west of the house. It was a spot where the wind always blew, bending the dry buffalo grass, and where a person could see the sun dropping behind the purple peaks of the mountains he had loved. Caleb dug the grave. He refused help, swinging the pickaxe with a grim, rhythmic fury, his shirt soaked through with sweat, ignoring the ache in his healing ribs. Lena watched him, holding Tommy's hat, the battered felt one with the turkey feather in the band, and his saddle, which she had cleaned and oiled until it shone. When the hole was deep enough, they lowered the pine box down with ropes. There was no preacher. The new circuit preacher had offered to come out, but Caleb had sent him away. Tommy deserved better than a stranger muttering words from a book. Caleb took off his hat and stood at the edge of the grave. The wind tossed his dark hair, exposing the gray at his temples. He was a good boy, Caleb said, his voice rough as gravel. He had a man's courage in a boy's heart. He did not have to jump. He did not have to fight. He did it because he believed in what was right. Caleb paused, his throat working. He looked at the open sky. Rest easy, son. We will watch the herd from here. Lena stepped forward. She dropped a handful of wildflowers she had found near the creek onto the wood. Then she placed his hat on the mound of earth Caleb had shoveled back in. "Thank you, Tommy," she whispered. She looked at Caleb. He was leaning on the shovel, staring at the fresh dirt, his face a mask of sorrow. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers were rough, calloused, and dirty, but they laced with hers instantly, holding on as if she were the only anchor in a spinning world. They stood there for a long time, side by side, listening to the wind whisper through the grass. 2 survivors standing over the one who had paid the price for their freedom. A week later, a rider from town brought a thick envelope. It was from Judge Holloway. Caleb opened it on the kitchen table. The lamp sputtered, casting long shadows. He read the document slowly, his lips moving slightly with the words. Then, he pushed them across the wood to Lena. "Read it," he said. Lena picked up the paper. It was heavy, formal bond. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was clear. The contract held by Eli Bard was declared void ab initio, invalid from the start. Lena Cutter was recognized as a free citizen of the territory, with full rights to her own person, labor, and property. She traced the seal of the court with her finger. "It is over," she said, her voice trembling. "I am free." Caleb stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the dark yard. "You are," he said. He turned to face her. The expression on his face was unreadable, guarded. "There is $500 in a tin under the floorboards in the bedroom," Caleb said. "It is everything I have saved. You can take it." Lena looked up, confused. "Caleb? You are free." "Lena," he repeated, stressing the word. "That means you have a choice. You can take that money. You can get on a train. You can go to San Francisco or St. Louis. You can go somewhere where no one knows your name, where no one has ever seen your feet, where the name Bard means nothing. You can start fresh." He paused, and for a second, his composure cracked. "You have been trapped your whole life. I will not be another cage. If you stay here, it is a hard life. The drought is bad, the work is endless, and the memories here are sharp. I would not blame you if you wanted to leave it all behind. Lena looked at the paper. Then she looked at the tin he had pointed to. Then she looked at him. She saw the tension in his shoulders. She saw the way his hands were clenched into fists at his sides, bracing for the blow of her departure. He was giving her the one thing no man had ever given her, the power to leave him. She stood up and walked around the table. She stopped in front of him. "You are right," she said. "It is a hard life. The dust ruins my skin. The wind gives me headaches. And you are a stubborn, quiet man who works too hard." Caleb flinched, looking down at his boots. "But," Lena continued, her voice softening, stepping closer until her chest brushed his shirt, "San Francisco does not have this sky, and St. Louis does not have you." She reached up and took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "I am not staying because I have nowhere to go. Caleb, I am staying because I am already home." Caleb let out a breath that sounded like a shudder. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her crushed against him, burying his face in her neck. "I thought you would go," he mumbled into her hair. "I was sure you would go. You cannot get rid of me that easily," she whispered. "We have a ranch to run, partner," and run it they did. The relief of the legal victory was short-lived, replaced by the brutal reality of the drought. The rains that had seemed promised by the storm never truly came. The sky turned a relentless, mocking blue, and the sun hammered the land with a vengeance. The creek dried up completely. They had to move the herd to the upper pasture where a spring still trickled from the rocks. But even that was fading. They worked from the moment the sky turned gray in the east until the stars were pinned hard and bright above them. It was grueling, back-breaking labor. They spent days digging out the spring, their hands blistering on the shovel handles, their backs screaming. They hauled water in barrels for the garden, fighting to save the vegetables that would feed them through the winter. There was no romance in the sweat that stung their eyes or the dust that coated their tongues. It was survival, pure and simple. But in the crucible of that work, something shifted between them. The polite distance of the early days was gone. They moved around each other with the easy familiarity of a team. One afternoon, a stubborn heifer refused to move from a mud bog. Caleb was knee-deep in the muck, pushing from behind, while Lena pulled on the rope from the bank. "Push, Caleb," Lena shouted, wiping hair from her eyes. "I am pushing," Caleb grunted. "She weighs more than the house." The heifer suddenly lunged forward, freeing herself with a sucking pop. Caleb lost his footing and fell face first into the black, foul-smelling mud. Lena gasped. "Caleb?" He sat up slowly, wiping the slime from his eyes. He looked like a swamp creature. He looked at the cow, which was now grazing happily, and then at Lena. He started to chuckle. Then he started to laugh. It was a deep, rusty sound that grew until he was shaking with it. Lena started laughing too. She slid down the bank and sat in the grass, laughing until her sides ached, laughing at the absurdity of their struggle, at the mud on his face, at the sheer stubbornness of life. "You look terrible," she gasped. "You should see yourself," he retorted, flinging a handful of mud at her boot. They sat there in the heat, dirty and exhausted, and felt a lightness that had nothing to do with the weather. As the weeks turned to months, the town of Red Rock began to thaw. It started with Mrs. Harper. She came by every Sunday, bringing a pie or a loaf of bread, sitting on the porch with Lena to shell peas and talk about the price of wool. She treated Lena not as a charity case, but as a neighbor. Then, it was the mercantile. When Lena walked in to buy flour, the shopkeeper did not look away. He nodded. "Afternoon. Miss Lena," he said, "we have got some new fabric in from the east. Thought you might like a look." And then, the moment that truly marked the change, Lena was loading the wagon when Mrs. Gable approached. She was the woman who had once called Lena a stray, loud enough for the whole street to hear. She looked older now, tired. "Miss Lena," Mrs. Gable said, clutching her handbag. "Mrs. Gable." Lena said, her voice cool. I wanted to say. The woman looked at Lena's boots, then at her face. My husband was at the courthouse that day. He told me what you did, what you showed them. She swallowed hard. I judged you wrong. Child. We all did. You have more grit than half the men in this valley. I am sorry for my words. Lena looked at the woman. She could have been angry. She could have thrown the apology back in her face. But she remembered Caleb's words about the town. They are scared people looking for someone to blame. Thank you, Mrs. Gable, Lena said softly. That means a great deal. When she told Caleb about it later, he smiled, a rare, full smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. The new sheriff, a man named Brady, who had been appointed by the governor, rode out to the ranch not to harass them, but to ask Caleb's advice on tracking a band of horse thieves. I heard you were the best tracker in the county before, Sheriff Brady said, tipping his hat. Caleb stood on his porch, a free man on his own land, and nodded. I might know a trick or two, Caleb said. The shadows of the past were retreating, chased away by the steady light of their daily life. October brought a chill to the air. The cottonwoods along the dry creek bed turned a brilliant, burning gold. One evening, as the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and violet, Caleb came in from the barn. He washed his hands at the basin, scrubbing them thoroughly. He put on a clean shirt. Lena was stirring a stew at the stove. She looked over her shoulder. You are dressed up for a Tuesday, she teased. Walk with me, Caleb said. His voice was tight, nervous. Lena put down the spoon. Is something wrong? With the herd? No, just walk with me. They walked out into the twilight. The air smelled of wood smoke and dry leaves. They walked to the stand of cottonwoods, where the leaves rustled like paper coins in the breeze. Caleb stopped by an old fallen log. He took his hat off and turned it in his hands. He looked at the mountains, then at the ground, then finally at her. Lena, he started. I am not a man of words. You know that. I know. She smiled. And I have not had much to offer you. A broken-down ranch, a bad reputation, a lot of work. You offered me a life. Caleb. That is not nothing. He took a step closer. We have been living under the pretense of an engagement for months now. To keep the law away. To keep you safe. Yes, but the law is gone now. You are safe. You do not need the shield anymore. Lena felt a cold stone drop in her stomach. Was this it? Was he sending her away after all? So, you want to end the arrangement? She asked quietly. No, Caleb said quickly. No. He dropped his hat on the grass. He took both her hands in his. I want to make it real. Lena stopped breathing. I do not want you to be my pretended wife, Caleb said, his voice shaking with the intensity of his emotion. I want you to be my wife, in the eyes of God and the law and anyone else who cares to look. He looked searching into her eyes. Not because I own you, not because I saved you, but because you are the other half of me. Because when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I want to see is your face. Because I love you. Lena. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring, the simple gold band he had bought in the general store. He had taken it back when the judge's papers came, saying it was a prop. Now, he held it out like an offering. I promise you this, Caleb said. If you take this, you are an equal partner. You have the say in everything. And if you ever feel trapped, if you ever feel like the walls are closing in, the door is always open. You stay because you choose to, every single day. Lena looked at the ring. For years, jewelry had meant payment. It had meant shackles. But looking at Caleb's weathered face, seeing the fear and the hope warring in his eyes, she saw only freedom. She remembered the way he had washed her feet, the way he had stood between her and the mob, the way he had laughed in the mud. I have one condition, she said, her voice thick with tears. Anything. We always tell the truth. She said, even when it hurts, even when we are scared. We never hide from each other. I promise, Caleb said solemnly. Then yes, she whispered. Yes, Caleb. He slid the ring onto her finger. It caught the last dying light of the sun. He pulled her into his arms. and he kissed her. Not the tentative, careful kiss of the barn during the storm, but a deep, claiming kiss that spoke of a future they would build stone by stone. They were married 2 weeks later. There was no church. They stood by the creek bed, under the open sky, Mrs. Harper stood beside Lena. Sheriff Brady stood beside Caleb, the circuit preacher, a dusty man with a kind face, read from a worn Bible. Lena wore a dress borrowed from Mrs. Harper's daughter, a pale cream lace that was a little too big in the shoulders, but she did not care. She held a bouquet of dried sage and late-blooming asters. The wind tugged at her hair, blowing strands across her face. The air smelled of dust and wild sage. It was not a fairy tale wedding. It was a Western wedding, rough, simple, and real. When Caleb said, "I do," his voice was steady as a rock. When Lena said it, she felt the words vibrating in her chest, a declaration of victory against every man who had tried to silence her. After the neighbors had gone, after the simple feast of roast chicken and cider was finished, the night settled over the ranch. They walked into the house. It was quiet, but it was not empty. It was full of them. Caleb locked the door. He turned down the lamp until the room was bathed in a soft, golden glow. He walked over to Lena, who was standing by the bed, looking nervous. The transition from partners to husband and wife felt huge, a threshold she was suddenly shy to cross. Caleb did not rush. He took her hands. "You are beautiful," he said. He sat on the edge of the bed and patted the space in front of him. "Come here." She stepped closer. He reached out and began to unbutton the back of her dress. His fingers were clumsy but gentle. The dress fell to the floor in a pool of cream lace. She stood in her shift. He reached down and lifted the hem of the shift. He patted his knee. "Show me your feet," he said softly. Lena laughed, a nervous, bubbling sound. "Again?" she asked. "You know what they look like. I want to see them," he said. She lifted her skirts. She placed her right foot on his knee. The scars were there. They would always be there. The white lines, the burn marks, the ugly brand on her arch. But they were healed. They were no longer angry red wounds. They were silver lines of history. Caleb took her foot in his hands. His palms were warm and rough. He ran his thumbs over the scars, tracing the map of her survival. He bent his head and kissed the scar on her ankle. Then the one on her instep. Then the brand. It was an act of reverence. He was rewriting the memory of her body. He was overwriting the pain with love. He looked up at her, his eyes dark with a fierce, protective desire. His hand slid slowly, reverently higher. They moved past her ankles, up the curve of her calves, over the old lash marks that no longer hurt. Lena felt a wave of warmth start in her belly and flood outward. It was not the frantic adrenaline of the storm. It was a deep, tidal pull. She did not feel afraid. She felt cherished. She reached down and tangled her fingers in his hair, pulling him up. "Stand up, husband," she whispered. He stood. She pulled him into her arms, and they fell onto the bed together, a tangle of limbs and heartbeats. Later, the wind picked up outside. It rattled the eaves, a cold, lonely sound that swept down from the mountains. It was the sound of the Wild West, unforgiving, vast, and indifferent to human life, but inside the ranch house, the air was still and warm. Lena lay with her head on Caleb's chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. His arm was thrown over her, a heavy, protective weight. Their legs were tangled together under the quilt. She looked at the window, where the moonlight was painting a square of silver on the floor. She thought of the drought that was still waiting for them tomorrow. She thought of the hard work, the uncertain winters, the fragility of life in this harsh land. She knew the darkness would always be there, waiting at the edge of the firelight. But as she pressed closer to Caleb, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers, she knew they had something strong enough to push it back. They had forged a love out of dust storms and gunfire, out of judgment and pain. It was not a pretty love, wrapped in silk. It was a leather-tough love, scarred and weathered and enduring. And as the wind howled outside, searching for a way in, Lena closed her eyes and fell asleep, safe in the arms of the man who had asked to see her scars and loved her because of them. Finally, and completely home on the wild land they had claimed together. Thank you so much for listening to the final chapter of Show Me Your Feet. It has been a journey walking these dusty roads with Caleb and Lena, and I hope their story of healing and resilience resonated with you. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment below sharing your country or city, and tell me what you thought of the ending. Did Caleb and Lena's journey move you? If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the From Wild West channel so you never miss a new tale from the frontier. I look forward to reading your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, keep your fences strong and your heart open.